Assessment Journal, Private Record, Analyst Vorn Teschel, Hennaki Assessment Corps, assigned to candidate world designated in the official record by its catalog number and known to its inhabitants, I have learned, by a word that means simply the ground. They named their entire world * the ground. I note this because it is my habit to note the first strange thing about any people, and this is the first strange thing about these. The other candidate worlds I have assessed named their planets after gods or founders or the lights in their sky. These named theirs after the dirt under their feet. I do not yet know what to make of it. I suspect it means they are an unimaginative people, literal and earthbound. I will revise this if the evidence demands. My task is simple and I have performed it 40 times before on 40 worlds. I am to study the candidate species' capacity for war, assemble a true accounting of its strength, and deliver to the Corps a single number, the threshold, which is the cost the Hennaki would pay to take this world. If the threshold is low, the fleet comes. If it is high, the world is left to ripen and reassessed in a generation. I have ended the independent history of 11 peoples with a low number and spared 29 with a high one, and I have never once been wrong because I do not guess. I measure. War is the most measurable thing a species does. It is arithmetic written in bodies, and I am very good at arithmetic. These people make war constantly. That is my first finding, entered on my first day in orbit, reading their transmissions as my ship's mind unpacks their languages. They have a recorded history a few thousand of their years deep, and there is not one century in it without war. By the crude standard of the Corps, this would mark them as dangerous. But I have learned to distrust the crude standard. A people that makes war constantly is not necessarily strong. Often it is merely a people that has never learned to stop bleeding. I will need to see how they fight, not merely that they fight. I will need to see the arithmetic. I begin tomorrow. Archivist's note: he begins with the dirt. I want to mark this because he was closer to the answer on his first day than he would be for weeks afterward, and he did not know it. We named our world the ground because the ground is what you fight for, what you are buried in, what you carry your dead back to. He thought it meant we lacked imagination. It meant we had already decided before he ever arrived what was worth dying for. He measured everything except that for a very long time. Assessment Journal, Day 4. I have spent 3 days inside the recorded wars of these people, and I will set down my preliminary judgment, which is low. The threshold for this world will be low. I am not yet certain enough to file it, but I am certain enough to write it here in private, where I am allowed to be premature. These people fight badly. I do not mean they are cowards. They are emphatically not cowards, and I will return to their strange relationship with fear in a later entry, because it is the one finding that genuinely unsettles me. I mean that as a matter of pure military arithmetic, they are catastrophically inefficient. They fight wars they cannot win. They defend positions of no strategic value. They expend enormous force recovering territory they will abandon a season later. Again and again in their history, I find the same pattern. A commander with every rational reason to withdraw chooses instead to hold, and holds past the point of all sense, and loses far more than the position was ever worth, and their own later historians praise this as greatness. By Hennaki doctrine, this is not greatness, it is failure. War is the science of achieving an objective at the lowest cost in force. A commander who spends 100 to hold a thing worth 10 has failed at war regardless of whether he holds it. These people do this constantly, almost as a matter of principle, and their culture celebrates the ones who do it most extravagantly. They have a word, I am still mapping its full meaning, that they apply to a soldier who dies holding a hopeless position, and the word is not fool, which is what my doctrine would call him. The word is closer to * hero. They have inverted the arithmetic. They assign the highest value to the least efficient act. This tells me they will be easy. A people that does not understand the arithmetic of war cannot defend against a people that does. The Hennaki do not hold hopeless positions. We do not spend 100 to save 10. We withdraw, we reassess, we return when the arithmetic favors us, and we win every time on every world because we never let sentiment corrupt the math. These people are drowning in sentiment. Their entire military history is sentiment wearing the costume of war. The threshold will be low. I feel it already. I will keep measuring, because measuring is my discipline, but I do not expect the number to rise. Archivists note, read that again, they assign the highest value to the least efficient act, and understand that he had just discovered the most important thing about us and filed it as a weakness. He was right about the facts. We do hold hopeless positions. We do spend 100 to save 10. What he could not yet see is that he had the equation backwards. He thought we were bad at minimizing cost, when the truth is that cost was never the thing we were trying to minimize. We were minimizing something else, something his doctrine had no symbol for, and because his doctrine had no symbol for it, he could not see it on the page even as he wrote it down. He spent 4 days looking directly at the answer and calling it a mistake. I have done the same thing with simpler truths in my own life. We all have. It is the most human thing in his entire journal, and he was not even human. Assessment Journal, Day 9. I have selected a single engagement to study in depth, because the Corps has taught me that a species reveals itself most completely not in its grand wars but in its small desperate ones, where doctrine falls away and the true reflexes show. I chose an engagement from roughly 80 of their years ago, a minor action in a larger war, fought over a bridge in a cold country, by a few hundred people on each side. It has no strategic importance. It is barely a footnote in their own records. I chose it precisely because it is small enough to measure completely. Let me reconstruct it as my ship's mind has assembled it from their records, so that the Corps may see what I see. A unit of perhaps 40 of their soldiers held the near end of a bridge across a frozen river. They were cut off. Their supporting force had withdrawn correctly by my doctrine, because the position was untenable and the river would be crossable elsewhere within days regardless. The 40 had been ordered to hold the bridge to cover that withdrawal, and the withdrawal was complete by the second day, which by every law of war meant the 40 had done their duty and should themselves withdraw. Their commander, a young officer named Harlan Reese, received no order to fall back. The order had been sent. The order never reached him. The communication had failed, as their primitive communications often did. And so Harlan Reese, not knowing the withdrawal was complete, not knowing his position no longer mattered, held the bridge. He held it for 11 days. I have checked the arithmetic 4 times because I did not believe it. 40 soldiers becoming 30, becoming 19, becoming 9, against a force that outnumbered them at times by 20 to 1, holding a bridge that no longer needed holding, for 11 days, in a cold that was killing them nearly as fast as the enemy was. By the 7th day, they were eating nothing. By the 9th, they were burning the stocks of their own weapons for warmth and fighting with what was left. On the 11th day, a relief force arrived, not because the bridge mattered, but because word had spread of what was happening at it, and other units had begun, against their own orders, to move toward the sound of it. 9 of Harlan Reese's 40 were still alive. Reese was not among them. He had died on the 6th day, and here is the detail that has kept me at this entry far longer than I intended. He had died on the 6th day, and his soldiers held for 5 more days after his death, holding a bridge that did not matter, under a commander who was already dead, with no order to do so and every reason not to. By my doctrine, this is meaningless. The position had no value. The defenders had no strategic purpose. The entire engagement was a catastrophic waste of force in service of nothing. If a Hennaki analyst submitted this as evidence of a species' strength, the Corps would reject it as evidence of the opposite. And yet I cannot stop reading it. There is something in the arithmetic that does not close. I keep arriving at the same impossible quantity. The soldiers held for 5 days after their reason to hold was dead. Reason, in my doctrine, is what makes a soldier fight. Remove the reason and the soldier stops. These soldiers' reason died on the 6th day and they did not stop. There is a variable here I have not identified. I do not like unidentified variables. I will find it. It is probably something simple, a failure of their communications again, an ignorance of their own position, some confusion that my doctrine can absorb. I will find the mundane explanation and the unease will pass. I am sure of it. Archivist's note, Harlan Reese is real, the bridge is real. You can go and stand on it, we kept it, the way we keep such things. And the thing the analyst could not make close, why they held for 5 days after Reese died, he would spend the rest of his journal circling, getting nearer and nearer, and the answer was so simple that his entire civilization had no room for it. They did not hold the bridge for 5 more days because they misunderstood their position. They understood it perfectly. They held it because Reese had asked them to, and Reese was dead, and you do not stop keeping a promise to a man simply because he has died. If anything, you keep it harder. The analyst was looking for the variable that makes a soldier fight. He had it backwards, the way he had everything backwards at first. The variable he was hunting does not make us fight. It makes us unable to stop. Assessment Journal, Day 14. I said in an earlier entry that I would return to these people's relationship with fear, and that it was the one finding that genuinely unsettled me. I have now studied it for 5 days, and I am more unsettled, not less, and I am beginning to suspect that my low threshold may have been premature, which is not a sentence I have written in 40 assessments. Let me be precise about the Hennaki understanding of fear, so that the error, if it is an error, is legible. Among my people, and among the great majority of the species I have assessed, fear is a governor. It is the mechanism that prevents a soldier from spending himself uselessly. Fear and courage exist in a balance, and a well-made soldier is one in whom courage slightly exceeds fear, so that he advances when ordered and holds when ordered and breaks when the situation is truly hopeless, because breaking, at the right moment, preserves force for later use. A soldier without fear is a defective soldier. He dies too early and too cheaply. A soldier ruled by fear is also defective. He breaks too soon. The art of making armies is the art of tuning this balance. Every people I have assessed can be understood through the tuning of this balance. Their courage can be measured, their breaking point can be found, and once you know a people's breaking point, you know the threshold, because war, at bottom, is the business of reaching the enemy's breaking point before he reaches yours. These people do not have a breaking point. I do not mean they are fearless. This is the thing I must make the Corps understand, because it is the thing I did not understand until this week, and it changes everything. They are not fearless. They are, if anything, more afraid than most species I have assessed. Their records are full of fear. Their soldiers write of it constantly. The terror before battle, the shaking hands, the sickness, the desire to run. They feel all of it, fully, more fully perhaps than any people I have measured. And then they do the thing anyway. This is not courage as my doctrine understands courage. Courage in my doctrine is the absence or the mastering of fear. This is something else. These soldiers do not master their fear. They do not make it go away. They carry it, undiminished, into the act, and the fear does not stop them, and I cannot find the mechanism by which it fails to stop them, because in every other species the fear stopping them is the entire point of the fear. I have read 100 of their accounts now, and they all say a version of the same impossible thing. I was more afraid than I have ever been, and I went anyway. The fear is total and the action is total, and the two coexist in a way my doctrine says is impossible, because my doctrine treats fear and action as opposite ends of one balance, and in these people they are not on the same balance at all. They are two separate things. The fear runs at full strength, and the action runs at full strength, and neither one governs the other. I do not have a threshold for a people with no breaking point. The entire concept of the threshold assumes a breaking point. You find where they break and you apply enough force to break them. But if they do not break, if their fear, however total, simply does not translate into breaking, then there is no quantity of force that achieves the objective, because the objective of all force is to reach the breaking point, and they have removed the breaking point from the equation, not by being fearless, which I would understand, but by some mechanism that lets them be fully afraid and fully functional at once. I must withdraw my low threshold. I'm not yet ready to file a high one. I am, for the first time in my career, genuinely uncertain, and I find the uncertainty has a physical quality, a tightness in my breathing vents that I recognize, with some discomfort, as the early stage of the very emotion I have spent 2 weeks studying in another species. I am afraid of these people. I have not met one, I have only read them, and I am afraid. Archivist's note. He found it here, the real thing, and he named it almost perfectly. Fear and action as 2 separate channels rather than one balance. He was right. We do not conquer fear. Anyone who tells you they felt no fear in the worst moment is lying or broken. What we do, what he watched us do across 100 accounts and could not name because his language had no word for it, is feel the fear completely and act completely, both at full volume, and let them coexist. He thought this was a mechanism we had. It is not a mechanism. It is a decision, made fresh every single time by every single person in the worst moment of their life, and it is never guaranteed, and it never gets easier, and it is the most expensive thing a human being can do. He was right to be afraid. He was just afraid of the wrong part. The fear was never the thing that made us dangerous. The decision was. Assessment Journal, Day 19. I have changed my method. For 19 days I studied how these people fight. I will now study why, because the how has led me into a wall, and when the how leads into a wall, the core teaches us to step back to the why. The why of war is usually simple and always the same. Resources, territory, dominance, the 3 faces of survival. Every people I have assessed fights for some configuration of those 3. I expected to confirm this quickly and return to the harder questions. I have not been able to confirm it. That is the subject of this entry, and I write it with the breathing tightness that has not left me since day 14. On the surface, these people fight for the usual things. Their wars have the usual stated causes: land, wealth, power, the control of routes and rivers, and the cities that sit on them. If I read only the official causes, I would conclude they are an ordinary people fighting ordinary wars for ordinary reasons, and I would file the threshold and move on. But I have learned not to read only the official causes, and beneath the official causes of every war these people have fought, I keep finding the same stranger thing, and it does not match the official cause, and it is everywhere. They fight to bring their people back. I do not mean prisoners, though they will tear an army apart to recover prisoners in a way the arithmetic cannot justify. I mean something larger and stranger. Over and over, when I trace a unit's actual behavior in battle as opposed to its orders, I find that the thing they are actually doing, the thing that overrides their orders, their doctrine, their own survival, is recovering each other. A position is lost. They retake it, at enormous cost, because someone was left there. A soldier falls in open ground under fire. Others die trying to reach the body. Not to save a life, often the fallen one is plainly dead, and they go anyway and die in numbers to bring back a body that has no military value whatsoever. By my doctrine, this is the purest insanity I have encountered in 40 worlds. You do not spend the living to recover the dead. The dead are spent force. They have no further military value. To lose 3 soldiers recovering 1 corpse is to lose 3 soldiers and gain nothing. And yet it is not nothing to them. That is the wall I have hit. To them, the corpse is not spent force. The corpse is one of their people, and bringing it home is not a military act at all. It is something prior to the military, something the war is actually for, underneath all the official causes about land and rivers and routes. I am beginning to suspect, and I write this with great reluctance, because it unmakes my entire method, that these people do not fight wars for the reasons they state, or even for the 3 faces of survival. I am beginning to suspect that every war these people have ever fought has been, at its hidden root, the same war, a war to bring their people home. The land and the wealth and the power are the costume. The thing inside the costume is always the same. They go out and they bring each other back, and they will burn any quantity of force to do it, and they call the burning by other names, strategy, objective, territory, but the thing itself never changes. If this is true, then I have been measuring the wrong war for 19 days. I have been measuring the war of land and rivers, the visible war, the one with the arithmetic I am trained to read. And underneath it, the whole time, there has been a second war I did not know to measure, a war with no breaking point and no threshold, a war these people will not lose because losing it is not a concept that exists for them, because you cannot make a people stop trying to bring their people home. There is no force that achieves that objective. You can kill them all, but you cannot make them stop, and a people you can only stop by killing all of them is not a people with a low threshold. It is a people with no threshold at all. It is the thing the Corps was created to identify and has never in its history actually found. I must consider the possibility that I have found it. I must consider the possibility that this world should not be assessed for invasion but quarantined from it. I am not yet certain, but the breathing tightness is now constant, and I have begun to dream, which my people rarely do, and the dreams are of a frozen bridge I have never seen. Archivist's note. He understood it on day 19 and could not bear it, and so he wrote, "I am not yet certain," which is the sound of a mind that has seen the truth and is buying time before it has to live in it. He was certain. He had found the thing under the thing. Every war we ever fought was, underneath, the war to bring our people home. He was right, completely right, and no human historian had ever put it as cleanly as this alien did in a private journal it never meant anyone to read. We don't fight for land. We fight to stand on the land where our people are buried and say, "You are not lost, we came back for you, you are home." He thought this made us unstoppable. It does. But he did not yet understand the cost of being unstoppable in that particular way, and the cost is the rest of this document, and it is terrible, and he had to learn it the way we learned it, which is the only way it can be learned. Assessment Journal, Day 21. I returned to the assessment journal between the entries of dread, because the measuring did not stop even as the dread grew, and there is one category of finding I have not yet set down that the Corps must see, because it is the one that, more than the bridges or the long memory, convinced me past argument that these people cannot be assessed by our doctrine. It concerns what they do with their wounded. Among the Hennaki, and among nearly every people I have measured, the wounded soldier is a problem of arithmetic like all the others. A wounded soldier consumes resources, the labor of those who carry him, the materials that treat him, the force diverted to protect him, and produces, in the near term, nothing. Doctrine therefore treats the wounded as a calculation. A soldier who can be returned to function efficiently is recovered. A soldier who cannot is, by the cold arithmetic that has never failed us, better left, because the force spent saving him is force subtracted from the objective. This is not cruelty. It is mathematics. The Hennaki do not enjoy leaving their wounded. They simply understand that war is the science of the objective, and that sentiment toward the wounded is a corruption of that science. I have written those words 100 times in 100 assessments. I believe them completely. I am no longer able to write them without my breathing vents tightening, because of what I have now seen these people do. These people do not leave their wounded. I do not mean they are reluctant to. I mean that the leaving of a wounded person is, to them, a thing very close to the worst act their kind can commit, an act that their soldiers will risk and spend and lose anything to avoid, far past the point where the arithmetic screams at them to stop. I have watched in their records again and again, entire operations bent out of all strategic shape around the recovery of a single wounded soldier who, by my doctrine, should have been left. I have watched them lose 3 to save 1, 5 to save 2, whole units shattered in the attempt to reach a position where wounded were trapped. And the part that defeats my arithmetic completely is that they do this even when the wounded one cannot be saved, even when everyone involved knows the wounded one is dying and will die regardless, because to these people the point was never the saving. The point was that the wounded one not die alone, not die left, not spend his last moments believing his people had calculated him and found him not worth the cost. They will lose 3 living soldiers to ensure that one dying soldier dies knowing he was not abandoned. The arithmetic of this is catastrophic. The meaning of it has unmade my ability to file a number. Because here is what I finally understand, on day 21, writing this. The thing these people will not do, leave their wounded, leave their dead, calculate a person and find them not worth the cost, is the exact thing my entire doctrine is built on. The Hennaki conquer because we are willing to do the arithmetic that these people will not do. Our strength is precisely our willingness to leave what cannot be efficiently saved. And these people have built their entire civilization on the refusal of that willingness, and that refusal, which should make them weak by every law I know, has made them into the one thing my doctrine cannot defeat, because you cannot break a people whose fundamental organizing principle is that no one of them is ever, under any circumstances, for any objective, to be left behind. There is no pressure you can apply to such a people that they have not already agreed in advance to absorb. They decided, somewhere in their long, bloody history, that they would rather lose everything than leave anyone, and a people that has truly made that decision has removed itself from the reach of every weapon I know how to wield. Archivist's note. He found on day 21 the load-bearing wall of us, and he named it precisely. No one is ever to be left behind. It is the thing under the thing under the thing. We do not leave our wounded, our dead, our lost, our prisoners, our forgotten, and an alien with a calculator looked at this and understood that it was both the most strategically insane thing about us and the source of everything that made us unconquerable. He is right that it is not efficient. It has never been efficient. It has cost us, across our whole history, more than any enemy ever has. We keep choosing it anyway in every generation at every scale, from a soldier crawling back under fire for a friend to a whole civilization that will not forget its dead. The analyst measured the cost exactly and then watched us pay it, again and again, gladly, and somewhere in the watching he stopped being able to see it as a weakness, and started being able to see it as the most beautiful and terrible thing in the universe, which is what it is, which is what we are. Assessment Journal, Day 23. The core doctrine on conquest rests on a single assumption that I have never before had reason to examine because it has never before failed. The assumption is this, that a defeated people, given enough time and sufficiently gentle administration, accepts its defeat. This is the entire basis of how the Hennaki hold what we take. We do not garrison forever. We conquer, we wait a generation or two, and the conquered generation dies and is replaced by a generation that has never known independence, and that generation accepts our rule as the natural order because it has known no other, and the world becomes Hennaki not through force but through forgetting. Forgetting is our true weapon. Force only opens the door. Forgetting walks the world through it. I have ended the independence of 11 peoples and not one of them remembers, 3 generations on, that it was ever independent. They have forgotten. That is how it is supposed to work. That is how it has always worked. These people do not forget. I have spent 4 days on this and I am now certain of it, certain enough to file, though I have filed nothing yet because I no longer trust the act of filing. Because every finding I file makes the invasion more likely, and I am no longer sure I want the invasion to happen, and I will return to that disloyal thought in a later entry because it frightens me more than anything in their wars. But the finding itself is certain. These people do not forget their defeats, and more importantly, they do not forget their dead, and a people that does not forget its dead cannot be conquered by forgetting, which means it cannot be conquered by the only method we have that lasts. Let me show the Corps what I mean. I have found in their records defeats that are thousands of their years old, battles lost, people scattered, cities burned to the foundation, that they still remember, not as history but as wound. They build monuments to their defeats. They teach their children the names of fields where they were slaughtered. They keep the dates and they mark them every year. And on those days, an entire people will stop and remember a loss that happened so long ago that by Hennaki reckoning it should have vanished into the forgetting 20 generations back. They will not let it vanish. They hold their wounds open on purpose, across thousands of years, and they call this remembering, and they consider the failure to do it a kind of sin. A people like this cannot be administered into acceptance. You may conquer them, but every grave you make becomes a date they will mark forever. Every defeat becomes a wound they will keep open and teach to children not yet born. And the generation that should forget will instead inherit the whole undimmed memory and carry it forward, waiting. They do not lose wars. They defer them. A defeat, to these people, is not an ending. It is a debt entered in a ledger that has no expiration, to be collected whenever the ledger's keepers are finally able, even if able means in 500 years, even if the original wound is so old that no living person remembers the faces, only the date and the obligation and the name of the ground. I understand now why they named their world asterisk the ground. I mocked it on my first day. I called it unimaginative. I was a fool. They named their world the ground because the ground is where the dead are kept, and the dead are the thing they will not forget, and a people defined by the dead it carries is a people that has named itself correctly. I named 40 worlds by their gods and their stars, and never once understood what I was reading. These people named theirs by the dirt that holds their dead, and it is the most accurate name I have encountered in my career, and I have begun to be ashamed of having laughed at it. Archivist's note. This entry is the one I have read most often, because it is the one where he stops being an enemy and becomes a witness. He understood the long memory, that we do not forget our dead, that defeat is a deferral and not an ending, that you cannot conquer a people who keep their wounds open on purpose. He understood it so well that he was ashamed of having misjudged us. But I want to add the part he could not see from outside, the part that is not a weapon and not a strength, the part that is just the truth. The long memory is not free. It is the heaviest thing we carry. Every people who keeps its dead this way pays for it, in grief that never closes, in wounds held open across centuries that other peoples would have let scar. He saw the weapon. He did not yet see that the weapon and the wound are the same thing, and that we did not choose to be unconquerable. We chose to keep our dead, and being unconquerable is simply what that choice looks like from the outside, to someone holding a calculator. Assessment Journal, Day 24. There is a finding I have resisted recording because I do not know how to fit it into an assessment, and an analyst who records only the findings he knows how to use is a liar by omission. So I will record it plainly and admit I cannot place it. These people laugh in the worst moments of their lives, and I do not understand it, and I have come to think that not understanding it is the final measure of the distance between my people and theirs. I have been studying their morale, the thing that holds a fighting force together under pressure, which every doctrine treats as a resource to be managed, maintained, and in the enemy degraded. Hennaki morale is a function of confidence. A Hennaki force fights well when it believes it will win, and degrades as that belief degrades, which is why the demonstration works, why showing a people the hopelessness of resistance collapses their will. Morale, in my doctrine, is belief in victory. Degrade the belief, and you degrade the force. These people's morale is not a function of belief in victory. I have now confirmed this across dozens of their accounts, and it is the strangest thing I have measured. Their morale is highest, often, precisely when their situation is most hopeless, not despite the hopelessness, but in some way I cannot parse because of it, or alongside it, or in defiance of it. And the mechanism by which they sustain it, the thing they do in the worst moments, the thing that I have watched again and again and cannot fit into any doctrine, is that they make each other laugh. I will give the Corps an example, though I warn that it will seem to them, as it seemed to me, like evidence of madness. In the engagement at the bridge, Harlan Reese's bridge, the one I cannot stop returning to, there is a recovered fragment, a thing one of the soldiers wrote in the 9th day of the 11, when 19 of the original 40 were left, when they were burning their own equipment for warmth and had not eaten in days and were, by any measure, already dead and simply not yet stopped. And the fragment is not a prayer or a farewell or a curse. The fragment is a joke. One of the dying soldiers had made a joke in the 9th day about the quality of the bridge they were dying for, and another soldier had written it down because it had made them all laugh, the 19 of them, laughing on a frozen bridge in the 9th day of holding it for nothing. And the one who wrote it down noted that the laughing had warmed them more than the burning equipment had. I have sat with this fragment for a long time. By my doctrine, it is impossible. Laughter is a signal of safety, of ease, of the absence of threat. It is the opposite of the state a soldier should be in on the 9th day of a hopeless holding. And these people produce it most reliably in exactly the moments my doctrine says it cannot exist. I have come to a tentative understanding, which I offer with no confidence. The laughter is not a signal of safety. It is a weapon against the dark, the same weapon as the holding and the recovering and the not forgetting, pointed inward instead of outward. When these people laugh in the worst moment, they are doing the thing they always do, which is refusing to let the worst moment have the last word, refusing to be only their fear and their grief, insisting, even on the 9th day, even burning their weapons, even already dead, that they are still themselves, still together, still able to give each other the small warmth of a joke about a bad bridge. It is the morale of a people whose morale was never about winning, because they have never, underneath, been fighting to win. They have been fighting to remain themselves together to the end, whatever the end is, and you cannot degrade that morale by showing them they will lose, because losing was never the thing they were trying to avoid. Being alone was. And a joke on the 9th day is the sound of people who have refused, even there, even then, to be alone. Archivists note, the bridge joke survives. I will not repeat it here because it is not funny out of its context. It is funny only if you are 19 people freezing to death together on the 9th day, and then, I am told, it is the funniest thing in the world. The analyst could not parse it and parsed it anyway, better than most of us could. That our laughter in the dark is not denial, it is defiance. It is the refusal to let the worst moment make us less than ourselves or more alone than we have to be. We are a people who tell jokes at funerals. Outsiders find it grotesque. The analyst found it, finally, wholly, the last refusal, the smallest and most stubborn one, the insistence on warmth where there is no reason for warmth. It studied our weapons and our tactics for weeks, and the thing that broke its heart open was a joke about a bad bridge. I think that is exactly right. I think that is where we keep the deepest part of ourselves, in the laughter we manage when we have no business managing it, and an alien sent to measure us for death found it, and could not measure it, and loved us for it instead. Assessment Journal, Day 25. One more finding from the assessment phase, recorded late because I needed the others to make sense of it. It concerns how these people lead, and it is the last piece of the structure, the thing that holds all the other strange pieces together. Among the Hennaki, leadership flows downward. The commander holds the objective, and the objective flows down through the ranks as orders, and the soldier's relationship to the war is mediated entirely through obedience. He fights because he is commanded to fight, and the quality of an army is the quality of its obedience. This is true of nearly every people I have measured. The commander is the mind, the soldiers are the body does what the mind directs. Degrade the mind, kill the commander, sever the chain of command, and the body falters, because the body does not contain the objective, only the commander does. This is doctrine. It is why we target their commanders. It is why I noted, long ago with such confusion, that Harlan Reese's soldiers held the bridge for 5 days after Reese died, when by all doctrine the death of the commander should have ended the holding. I called it an anomaly then. I understand it now, and it is not an anomaly, it is the key. These people's leadership does not work by flowing downward. I have studied it for days, and the truth is nearly the reverse of my doctrine. Among these people, the objective does not live in the commander and flow down to the soldiers. The objective lives in the soldiers, in every one of them, individually, completely. And the commander's role is not to contain the objective, but to serve it, to coordinate it, to help the soldiers do the thing they already, each of them, fully intend to do. This is why killing their commanders does not stop them. The objective was never in the commander. Harlan Reese did not contain the reason to hold the bridge. Every one of his soldiers contained it completely, independently. And so when Reese died, the reason did not die, because it had never lived in Reese. It had lived in all of them, and it went on living in all of them, and they held for 5 more days because the holding was theirs, not Reese's, had always been theirs. And a thing that is truly yours does not stop when someone else dies. The implications of this for war are total, and they are why these people cannot be defeated by any method my doctrine contains. We fight to break the enemy's chain of command, because in every normal people the chain of command is where the war lives. These people have no chain of command in that sense. They have coordination, they have leaders, but the war does not live in the leaders. The war lives in every single person, distributed, redundant, unkillable. You cannot decapitate a people whose every member is the head. You cannot sever a chain of command when the command is not in a chain, but in 500,000 separate hearts, each containing the whole objective, each able to carry the war alone if every other heart stops. The best leaders these people produce understand this perfectly. They do not command their people so much as articulate what their people already are, give voice to the objective that already lives in every one of them. Margaret Vey was such a leader. She held no rank. She was a school teacher. And when she said asterisk, now we will show them what we are asterisk, she was not issuing an order. She was articulating the objective that already lived in every person who heard her. And they did not obey her. They recognized themselves in her, which is 1,000 times stronger than obedience, because obedience can be broken and recognition cannot. I have to set down the conclusion this forces, though it is the conclusion that ends my career and perhaps more. There is no threshold for these people. The threshold assumes the war can be reached and broken at some point, a chain of command, a will, a breaking point, a place where applied force achieves collapse. These people have distributed the war so completely, into so many redundant hearts, each containing the whole of it, that there is no point to reach, no head to take, no center to break. The war is everywhere in them and nowhere you can strike it. To defeat them you would have to break every heart individually, which is to say you would have to kill every single one of them, which is not war, it is extinction. And a people who can be stopped only by their own extinction is, for all military purposes, unconquerable. And I am going to file this, finally. I am going to file the highest number, and let them replace me, because it is the truth, and I have spent my life serving the truth even when it was monstrous. And for once in my life the truth is not monstrous. The truth is these people, and I will serve it one last time. Archivist's note: he understood our leadership better than most of our own political philosophers, and he understood it as a soldier's fact, not a theory. The war lives in everyone, which is why killing our leaders never stopped us, which is why Reese's bridge held past Reese's death. He resolved here to file the highest number, to tell the truth that would save us, knowing it would cost him his position and worse. The reader knows what he did not, that it no longer mattered that the fleet was already coming on his 4th-day lie. But I want it recorded that he chose, at the end of his assessment, to tell the truth that would have saved us, before he knew it was too late. The choice was real even though the chance was already gone. He tried to save us. It is in the journal in his own hand. The enemy tried to save us and was too late, and then spent the rest of its life making sure we would not be lost. I do not know how to hold all of that. I have stopped trying. I only keep it the way we keep everything, the way he taught me, the way we taught him. Assessment Journal, Day 26. I must write now about the disloyal thought, because it has stopped being occasional and become the floor I stand on, and an analyst who hides the floor he stands on from his own journal is no analyst at all. The thought is this: I do not want the Hennaki to come here. I will set down how monstrous that sentence is by the standards I have lived by. I am an instrument of the Assessment Corps. I have no function except to measure worlds for the fleet. I have ended 11 peoples and felt nothing, because feeling nothing was the whole of my professional virtue. The analyst who feels is the analyst who errs, and I have never erred because I have never felt. For 26 days I have been measuring this world, and somewhere in those days, without permission, against my entire training, I began to feel, and the feeling has grown until it has a name, and the name is dread, and the dread is not for myself and not for the Hennaki. The dread is for what will happen if my own people meet these people, and it is not the dread of our defeat. It is the dread of what defeating us would cost them, and the dread of what surviving us would cost them more. Let me explain the structure I serve, so the shape of my disloyalty is clear. When an analyst files a threshold, the number is not a recommendation. It is a trigger. A low number summons the fleet automatically. The Corps does not deliberate because deliberation is sentiment and sentiment is forbidden. I filed a low preliminary threshold for this world on my 4th day before I understood anything. I withdrew it on day 14, which I am permitted to do once. I cannot withdraw it again. The next number I file is final, and it will either summon the fleet or quarantine the world, and there is no third option and no appeal. And the entire weight of what these people are now rests on a single number that I, alone, will choose. If I file high, if I file the truth, that these people have no breaking point, that they cannot be conquered by forgetting that every war with them is the war to bring their people home, and that war has no threshold, then the world is quarantined and the fleet never comes, and these people never know how close they were and live. That is what the truth demands. The truth is a high number. The truth saves them. But I am afraid the Corps will not accept a high number from me, because no analyst has ever filed the highest number, because the highest number means unconquerable, and the Corps doctrine holds that no people is unconquerable, that the highest number is a failure of measurement rather than a fact about a world. If I file it, they will not quarantine the world. They will replace me. They will send another analyst, one who has not begun to feel, one who will measure only the visible war of land and rivers, and file the low number I filed on my 4th day, and the fleet will come, and these people will do to the fleet what Harlan Reese's soldiers did to the bridge, and the cost will be beyond anything the Corps has ever paid, and it will not stop the Hennaki, because we also do not break. And the two peoples who do not break will grind against each other across a generation, until one of them is not killed but exhausted past the possibility of continuing. And I do not know which one it will be, and I do not want to find out because I have come to care, against all my training, what happens to both. That is the disloyal thought in full. I do not want the Hennaki to come here, not to spare these people only, but to spare my own, because I have looked at what these people are, and I have understood that there is no version of that meeting that does not cost more than any world is worth. The arithmetic that has never failed me has finally produced a number I cannot file, because the number is too high to be believed and too true to be wrong, and I am sitting alone in orbit above a world that named itself after the ground that holds its dead, holding the only honest measurement of my career, and I cannot make myself write it down. Archivist's note: I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make him a hero, and he was not a hero. He was a frightened functionary who had spent his life ending peoples, and had finally met one that made him feel the weight of it. But I will say this for him, across all the distance between us, he was the only one of his kind who ever did the math correctly. The Corps doctrine was right that no single people is unconquerable. What the doctrine missed, and what this analyst alone saw, is that conquerable is not the same as worth conquering, and that a people who will not forget and will not break and will burn the world to bring their dead home can be defeated only at a price that defeats the victor too. He saw it. He sat with it for 26 days. And then he had to decide what to do. And what he decided is the reason any of us are alive to read his journal at all. I am going to step out of the journal now, fully, for the length of one passage, because the reader has reached the point where the document cannot be understood without knowing the thing I have withheld, and it would be a cruelty to withhold it longer. The invasion happened. Everything you have read so far, the analyst's study, its growing dread, its disloyal thought, the number it could not file, all of it is the record of a mind racing against a clock it did not know was already running out. Because while analyst Vorn Teschel sat in orbit measuring us, agonizing over whether to file the number that would summon the fleet was already coming. It had been dispatched on the strength of the low preliminary threshold the analyst filed on its 4th day, before it understood anything. The Corps had not waited. The doctrine that summons the fleet automatically had done exactly that. The analyst believed it still held the choice in its hands. The choice had been taken from it on day 4 by its own premature certainty, and it would not learn this until the fleet arrived. And by then it would be too late for the high number to matter, because the thing the high number was meant to prevent would already be in our sky. I withheld this because I needed you to feel what the analyst felt, the false belief that the decision was still open, the agony of a choice that had, unbeknownst to the chooser, already been made. That false belief is the heart of the document. The analyst spent its last days of certainty laboring over a number that could no longer change anything, and there is no part of this story sadder to me than that. An alien mind working itself toward mercy while the engines of its own people's cruelty had already passed the point of recall. It thought it was deciding our fate. It was only documenting our test. The fate had been set in motion the day it underestimated us, and all its later understanding, all its dread and its shame and its disloyal growing love, could not pull the fleet back, any more than understanding a wound can close it. So the journal you are reading splits, after day 26, into 2 documents that the analyst kept simultaneously and that I have learned to read together. There is the assessment journal, which continues, the analyst still measuring, still learning, still circling the truth. And there is a second record, which begins on the day the fleet appeared, and which is no longer assessment but witness, because by then there was nothing left to assess, only a thing to watch and to write down. The analyst watched the Hennaki fleet meet the people it had spent 26 days learning to fear, and it recorded what it saw. And what it saw is the reason its journal survived at all, because at the end the analyst made a choice about this document that cost it everything, and that choice is why I have it, and why I can annotate it, and why my people exist to read it. I will let the 2 records run together now, the way they ran in the analyst's last days. When the voice is measuring, it is the assessment journal. When the voice is watching the sky, it is the witness. They are the same mind, days apart, learning the same lesson from 2 sides, the lesson it had been circling since day 4, the lesson its whole civilization could not hold, the lesson that we did not teach on purpose and would have given anything not to have to teach at all. Here is the day the fleet came. Witness record, the day the fleet came. I saw the fleet enter the system before the people on the ground could have known it was there. I had a moment, perhaps an hour of their time, in which I alone, of every mind in this volume of space, understood both what was coming and what it was coming for. I understood the fleet, because I am Hennaki and I know our doctrine and our strength. And I understood these people, because I had spent 26 days learning them better than the fleet's commanders ever would, because the fleet's commanders had only my 4th day threshold, the low number, the lie I told before I knew anything. The fleet was coming confident. It was coming to take a world I had told it was weak. And I sat in orbit with the truth I had been unable to file, watching my own people sail toward a thing I now knew would not break, carrying a confidence I myself had given them, and I could not warn anyone, because there was no one to warn who would listen, and so I did the only thing left to a mind in my position. I began to write down what I saw, so that someone, someday, might understand. The fleet's doctrine for a low-threshold world is a demonstration. You do not begin a conquest with subtlety against a people you believe is weak. You begin with a demonstration of force so total that the people's will collapses before the real fighting begins. You reach the breaking point immediately, with overwhelming violence against a single target, and the rest of the world, seeing it, breaks. This works. I have seen it work 11 times. The demonstration ends the war before it starts. It is, by the arithmetic, the most merciful method, because it costs the fewest lives on both sides. A people that breaks at the demonstration does not have to be ground down city by city. One city pays so that the rest may surrender. The fleet chose a city for the demonstration. I will not give the city's name as the fleet's records gave it, a catalog number, a target designation. I will give it the name its people gave it, because I have learned that the name matters, that these people are their names and their ground and their dead. The city was called Ashford. It held a little under 2 million people. The fleet's demonstration doctrine required that it be made an example with such totality that no other city would consider resistance. And I watched from orbit, with the cold clarity of a mind that has measured these people for 26 days, as the fleet made its first and final error, the error I could have warned them of and could not, the error contained in everything I had learned and been unable to file. They believed Ashford was the demonstration. They believed they were showing the rest of the world what resistance would cost, so that the rest of the world would break. They did not understand that they were not creating an example. They were creating a date. They were not showing these people what would happen if they resisted. They were giving these people, who do not forget their dead, who hold their wounds open across centuries, who named their world after the ground that keeps the fallen. They were giving these people 2 million reasons that would never expire, entered in a ledger with no bottom, owed by a people who always, always collect. The fleet thought it was ending a war with one blow. It was beginning the only kind of war these people have ever truly fought, the war to bring their people home, and it had just made 2 million of them that needed bringing. I knew, watching the demonstration begin, that the Hennaki had already lost, not that they would lose, that they had already lost in the instant they chose Ashford, the way you have already fallen the instant your foot leaves the cliff, whatever happens on the way down. I had filed a low number on my 4th day. The fleet had believed me. And now 2 million people were about to become the thing my entire civilization had no defense against, and I had helped, and I started to write faster, because I understood that the only thing I could still do for anyone was to be the witness, to make sure that what happened next was recorded by someone who understood it, so that it would not be lost, so that it would not be forgotten. And I laughed, a terrible laugh, alone in my orbit. Because not forgetting was their weapon, and I had just made it mine, and I was about to spend the rest of my life using it the way they did, holding a wound open on purpose so that the dead would not be lost. Archivist's note: Ashford is why we are free. Every child here learns the name before they learn to read. The analyst saw, in the moment the fleet chose it, the thing our own leaders did not fully grasp until years into the war, that the Hennaki had not frightened us, they had indebted us, and there is no force in the universe that collects a debt like grief that refuses to forget. I will tell the rest as he recorded it, but I want it known that an alien sat alone in the sky above a burning city and understood what it meant better than we did, and chose, in that moment, to become a keeper of our dead. He was the enemy. He filed the number that brought the fleet, and he spent everything that came after trying to make sure the 2 million were not lost. Both of those are true. I have stopped trying to make them resolve. He could not make them resolve either. That is the last thing he and I have in common. Witness record: the days after Ashford. The fleet waited for the surrender. This is the part I find hardest to write because I knew it would not come, and I watched my own people wait for it with a patience that was, in its way, a kind of innocence. They had done the demonstration. By their doctrine, by my doctrine, by everything either of us had ever known, the surrender should have come within days. A people sees a city of 2 million erased and the people break, and the breaking is the surrender, and the surrender ends the war. This is how it works. This is how it has always worked. On 11 worlds I measured myself. The surrender did not come. Something else came, and I had predicted it in my journal, and still I was not prepared to watch it happen, because predicting a thing and witnessing it are separated by the entire distance between arithmetic and grief. What came was silence, not the silence of a broken people. I have seen broken silence. It has a texture, a slackness, the sound of a will that has collapsed. This was the other silence, the one I had read about in their accounts of the moment before they do the thing they are most afraid of. It was the silence of a people feeling the full weight of what had been done to them, completely, the way they feel everything completely, and then, I watched this happen across an entire world in the space of a few days, and I will never forget it. And then setting the grief down, not putting it away, not forgetting it, never forgetting it, but setting it down where they could pick it back up later, and freeing their hands for the work. Let me record one scene from the ground, assembled from what I could observe and what was later recovered, because the whole of it was in the small pieces. In a town far from Ashford, a woman named Margaret Vey, I give her name. She would want her name given, received the confirmation that her sister and her sister's children had been in Ashford. She was a school teacher. She had no military role. The records show that she sat with the confirmation for one full day, alone in her house, doing nothing, and that no one disturbed her, because these people know to leave a person alone with the first day of a grief like that. And on the second day she walked to the town center, where others were already gathering, the same way, all of them having sat one day with their dead and then risen. And she did not weep in the square, though she had wept in the house, and she said to the people gathered there a sentence that was recorded, and that I have kept at the center of everything I have written since. She said, "They have told us what they will do to us. Now we will show them what we are." That was the surrender the fleet was waiting for. That was the breaking point, arriving, except that it arrived inverted, the way everything about these people arrives inverted to a Hennaki eye. The demonstration that was meant to collapse their will had instead revealed it, the way a great pressure reveals what a material is truly made of. The fleet had pressed on the breaking point with everything it had, and the breaking point it held. And behind it the fleet now faced not a frightened world begging for terms, but a world that had buried its first dead and risen with dry eyes and a debt to collect. A world of Margaret Veys who had felt the worst thing completely, and set it down and freed their hands. I sent a message to the fleet. I broke every protocol of my position to do it. I told them what I had learned in 26 days. I told them there would be no surrender, that there was no breaking point, that they had not made an example but a debt, that they must withdraw now before the debt came due, that the arithmetic had inverted, and every blow they struck would make them weaker by making the enemy more certain. I told them the truth I had been unable to file, finally, completely, in the plainest words I had. The fleet command reviewed my message and removed me from my position for sentiment corruption, which is the gravest professional failure a Hennaki analyst can commit. And they disregarded everything I said, because it contradicted the low threshold that I myself had filed on day 4, and they trusted my 4th day ignorance over my 26th day knowledge, because the 4th day number was the comfortable one, and the 26th day truth was not. And so I sat stripped of my function, alone in an orbit I was no longer authorized to hold, and I watched the war begin in earnest, the real war, the one with no threshold, and I kept writing, because writing was the only function I had left, and because someone had to remember and I had become, without quite deciding to, one of them. Archivist's note: Margaret Vey is real, and her words are carved where the town square used to be, in the new city built over it. We did not know, for generations, that an alien had heard her say them and understood them better than most of us did. Now we will show them what we are. She had no army. She was a school teacher who had lost her sister and her sister's children. And the analyst, watching, understood that her sentence was the most dangerous thing that had been said in the entire war, more dangerous than any weapon, because it was the sound of a people declining to break, and a people that declines to break can only be killed, never beaten, and you cannot kill all of a people that does not forget, because the killing only deepens the debt. He tried to tell his own people this. They called it sentiment and threw him away. They were still running the arithmetic of the visible war. He had learned to read the other one. Witness record, the first season of the war. I must explain the disparity so that what these people did is understood in its true proportion. The Hennaki fleet was not slightly stronger than these people. It was overwhelmingly, almost comically stronger. We crossed the distance between stars. They had only just begun to leave their own atmosphere. Our weapons could unmake a city from orbit, as Ashford proved. Their weapons were the weapons of a people who had spent their history fighting only each other, primitive by any measure the Corps would recognize. By every arithmetic of force, this was not a war. It was a foregone conclusion with a delay attached. The fleet command believed the delay would be measured in weeks. I, watching, no longer believed in the delay at all because I had stopped measuring force and started measuring the other thing, the thing with no threshold, and the other thing did not care about the disparity in force. The other thing had never cared about disparities in force. Harlan Reese's soldiers had not cared. Margaret Vey did not care. These people had been fighting hopeless engagements and winning the wars underneath them for their entire history. The disparity was not new to them. It was the condition they had evolved inside. Here is what the disparity could not account for, the variable the fleet's arithmetic had no symbol for, the thing I had named on day 14 and the fleet had never read. These people fought as though every one of them had already accepted death and was therefore free. I do not mean they were suicidal. That is the Hennaki misreading, and I must correct it precisely. A suicidal soldier is useless. He spends himself without purpose. These soldiers were the opposite of useless. They had simply done, each of them in private, the thing their whole culture had trained them for without anyone ever quite saying it aloud. They had looked at their own death, fully, felt the entire terror of it, and then set it down beside their grief where they could pick it back up later and freed their hands. A soldier who has set down his own death is not reckless. He is precise. He is the most dangerous instrument in the universe because every calculation the enemy makes about him is wrong. You cannot threaten him because the threat has already been answered. You cannot make him break because the breaking point is behind him, set down freely. You cannot even kill him in any way that helps you, because his death only adds to the debt that his people will collect, and he knows this, and it makes his dying a weapon rather than a defeat. The first major engagement I witnessed was over a range of mountains the fleet needed for a ground installation. The fleet's ground forces, and the fleet had been forced to commit ground forces, which by itself was a defeat, because the demonstration had failed and now the war had to be fought meter by meter. The fleet's ground forces outnumbered and outgunned the defenders in every category. The defenders were a mix of soldiers and people who had been school teachers and farmers and machinists a season before. By the arithmetic, the fleet should have taken the mountains in days. It took the fleet 11 weeks, and the fleet did not take the mountains. The people held them. They held them the way Reese held the bridge, past sense, past survival, past the point where any Hennaki force would have withdrawn to preserve itself for later use. They held them because the mountains held their dead now, the ones who had fallen in the first weeks of the holding, and you do not give up the ground that holds your dead. And every Hennaki advance that gained a slope lost it again to people who came back for the bodies. And the fleet's commanders watched their arithmetic dissolve, and could not understand why an enemy with every reason to withdraw kept coming back for corpses, kept dying to recover the already dead, kept turning each of the fleet's victories into a deeper debt. I understood. I had written it in my journal on day 19. These people do not fight for the mountains. They fight to bring their people home, and once their people are in the mountains become the thing they will not lose, and there is no force that takes from these people the ground that holds their dead. The fleet learned this in 11 weeks and 10,000 of its own soldiers and did not learn the lesson behind it, which is that there was no winning this, that every meter gained deepened the debt, that they were not conquering a world, they were digging their own ledger entry, line by line, body by body, in a book these people would never close. Archivist's note: the mountains are a national memorial now. What he describes, the holding, the coming back for the dead, the 11 weeks, is taught to our children as the long slope, and we tell it as a story of our strength. And it is, but the analyst's account adds the thing our telling leaves out, which is the arithmetic from the other side. 10,000 of theirs, to not take a range of mountains from a people who would not leave their dead. He saw both ledgers at once, ours and theirs, the debt we were collecting and the price they were paying to be defeated, and he was the only mind in the war that held both numbers. It is a terrible thing to hold both numbers. I think it is what killed him in the end, more than anything his own people did. You cannot carry both ledgers for long. He carried them to the end. Witness record. The second season. I stopped being able to watch the war as a whole. This is a confession of failure as a witness, and I record it as such, but I have come to think it was not only failure. The war as a whole was unbearable to watch, 2 ledgers growing at once, and so I did what these people do, what I had read them do in 100 accounts and not understood until I needed it myself. I narrowed. I found one soldier and I followed her, because a single life was something I could hold, and through the single life I could understand the whole better than I could by watching the whole, which is itself a thing these people somehow always knew, and my people never learned. The soldier was Margaret Vey's nephew. I did not choose him for that. I learned it only later, the way you learn the connections in their lives only after they matter, because these people are all connected by the dead they share. His name was Thomas Caro, and he had been a mechanic, and after Ashford took his aunt's sister and her children, he had done the thing they all did, sat one day with it, risen on the second, freed his hands and gone to the war, not as a soldier by training, but as one of the season's volunteers, the school teachers and farmers and machinists who filled the ranks the demonstration was supposed to have terrified into surrender. I watched Thomas Caro for the whole second season. I watched him learn the war, which these people learn fast because they learn it the way they learn everything completely, with the fear running at full volume the whole time. I watched him become, over a season, one of the soldiers who has set down his own death, and I watched the precise moment it happened, because I had become expert by then at seeing it happen, the small stillness that comes over them when they finish, in private, the work of looking at their own end and setting it beside their grief. For Thomas Caro it happened on a night before an assault on a fleet position, and he wrote a letter that night, as they do, the letter you write to be found, and the letter was recovered, and I have it, and I will set down only one line of it, because the whole of these people is in the one line. He wrote to his mother, "Don't bring me home if it costs anyone. I'm already home. Home is wherever we are." I had to stop writing when I first read that line, because it broke something in me that I did not know was still whole. Don't bring me home if it costs anyone. These people who fight every war to bring their people home, who will burn any quantity of force to recover a single body. Here was one of them, having understood the cost of that very thing, asking his own people not to pay it for him. He had seen the ledger from inside. He had seen what the recovering cost. And he had done the most extraordinary thing I encountered in the entire war, more extraordinary than any holding of any bridge or mountain. He had tried to release his own people from the debt of him, in advance out of love, so that they would not die bringing him home. I'm already home. Home is wherever we are. He had understood, this mechanic who had been a soldier for one season, the thing it took me 26 days of study to begin to grasp, and he had understood it more deeply than I did, because he had turned it into mercy. The thing that made these people unconquerable was the thing they would not stop paying for, and Thomas Caro, on a night before an assault, had tried to pay it down by himself for everyone by asking to be left. They did not leave him. Of course they did not leave him. He fell in the assault and his unit went back for him, and 2 of them fell doing it, and they brought him home against his written wish, because his written wish asked them to be something other than what they were, and they could not be other than what they were, even for him, even when he begged. They brought Thomas Caro home, and they buried him beside the ant who had said asterisk, "Now we will show them what we are." And the ground that held them both became one more piece of the world these people would never surrender, and the debt grew by 3, and the war went on. Archivist's note: Thomas Caro's letter is in our National Archive. I have stood in front of it. Home is wherever we are. We could not leave him, the analyst is right, and 2 more died bringing him back, and the analyst saw in that the whole tragic engine of us, that our strength and our wound are the same thing, that we cannot stop paying the price that makes us unbeatable, that even when one of us begs to release the others from the cost, the others cannot accept the release, because accepting it would make them a different people, a people who leaves its dead, a people who could be conquered by forgetting. We chose, over and over, across the whole war, to remain the people who could not be conquered, and the price of that choice was that we could never stop bleeding, and the analyst understood this so completely that I sometimes think it understood us better than we understand ourselves, the way an outsider sometimes sees the whole of a face that the face has never seen. Witness record: The Turning. I have written much about what these people are. I must now write about what they did to my own people, because this is the part the Corps would most want struck from any record, and therefore the part that must most be kept. The Hennaki did not lose this war because they were outfought. By every measure of force they were never outfought. They held their material superiority to the end. The Hennaki lost this war because of what fighting an unbreakable enemy does to a breakable one, and I watched it happen to my own kind, and it was the most frightening thing I witnessed, more frightening than Ashford, because Ashford was cruelty and this was something worse. This was the slow education of cruelty and the cost of itself. Understand the Hennaki soldier. He is tuned, as I described long ago, to a balance of fear and courage that breaks at the right moment to preserve force. He fights believing that the enemy, too, has a breaking point, and that reaching it ends the danger. This belief is the floor he stands on. It is what makes his own fear bearable. The knowledge that fear is a mechanism with a purpose, that it governs both sides, that war is a contest of breaking points, and the stronger will break the weaker. Remove that floor and the Hennaki soldier has nothing, because his courage was always built on the expectation of an enemy who could be made to stop. These people removed the floor. Season by season, the Hennaki soldier learned that nothing he did made these people stop. He killed them and they came back for their dead. He took their ground and they retook it for the bodies in it. He won every engagement by the arithmetic and lost the war underneath. And slowly, terribly, he began to understand that he was not fighting toward a breaking point, because there was none, that he was simply killing and killing into a thing that would not break and would never forget and was keeping count, and that every blow he struck was a stone added to a debt that would someday be collected from him. And the Hennaki soldier, who is brave the way a mechanism is reliable, began to feel the thing these people feel and master and act through, began to feel fear, except that the Hennaki soldier had never been trained to act through it, only to be governed by it. And so when the fear came, it governed him, the way it was built to, and he broke. It was the great and bitter irony of the war, and I recorded it with a kind of horror that had my own people's faces in it. The Hennaki had come to find these people's breaking point and apply force to it. Instead, these people had found the Hennaki breaking point, not through force, but simply by being unbreakable, by being a wall that did not yield, against which the Hennaki could only batter until the battering broke the batterer. My people began to desert. My people began to refuse orders. My people, the conquerors of 11 worlds, began to feel for the first time in their history the specific terror of fighting something that cannot be made to stop, and the terror unmade them from the inside, because they had no Thomas Caro in their culture, no Margaret Vey, no schoolteacher who had learned to set down her own death and free her hands. They had only the tuning, the balance, the mechanism, and the mechanism was never built for an enemy with no threshold, and it failed. I want to record one moment precisely. Late in the war, a Hennaki ground commander, faced with a position held by a handful of these people who would not yield, did a thing no Hennaki commander has done in our recorded history. He withdrew his force not to preserve it for later use, which is doctrine, but because his soldiers would no longer advance. Because they had looked at the handful of unbreakable people on that position and understood, in the wordless way that fear understands, that taking it would cost more of their souls than their bodies, that they would have to become something to take it that they did not want to become, and they had refused. They had refused to keep paying. And in that refusal I saw the whole war decided, because these people would never refuse to keep paying. It was the one thing they could not do, and a war between a people who will always pay and a people who has learned to refuse has only one ending, and it is not the ending the arithmetic of force predicts. Archivists note, we did not know for a long time how close the Hennaki came to taking everything in the first season, or how completely they came apart in the later ones. The analyst's witness record is the only account from inside their collapse, and I have thought a great deal about what he describes, that we did not beat them, we simply did not break, and the not breaking broke them. It is not a flattering thing, finally. We won because we could not stop bleeding and they learned they could. There is no glory in it that I can find, only the terrible fact of what we are, and an alien who watched us be it and recorded the cost on both sides and could not look away, and did not want us to be able to look away either. He kept this record so that we would know what our unbreakability is made of. It is made of every Thomas Caro we could not leave. He wanted us to remember that. He was right, too. Witness record, the Siege of Calder. I have told the war in its shapes and its meanings, but I have not yet given it to the reader at its full length, in a single engagement watched from beginning to end, and the document is incomplete without one, because these people cannot be understood in summary. They must be watched. So I will give the reader the Siege of Calder, which I observed in its entirety, and which contains, in one place, everything I learned about what these people are. Calder was a city the fleet needed. After the demonstration at Ashford failed to produce surrender, the fleet's revised doctrine was to take the surviving cities one by one, holding each as a base from which to administer the surrounding territory. Calder was the next in the sequence, a city of perhaps 500,000, on a river, defensible but not heavily defended, held by a mix of soldiers and the city's own people, who had refused the fleet's offer of evacuation in exchange for surrender. The fleet's commanders expected Calder to take a week. It had the force to take Calder in a week. By the arithmetic of force, Calder was already fallen. The siege lasted 4 months. I watched the city refuse to fall, day after day, in ways that violated everything my doctrine knew about how cities fall. A city falls when its will to resist is broken, and the fleet applied every method it knew to break Calder's will, and Calder's will did not break, because Calder, like all of these people, had its will rooted in a place my doctrine could not reach. The people of Calder were not defending a city. They were defending each other, and the place their dead were buried, and the place their living still lived, and you cannot break the will of people defending those things by showing them they will lose, because they had already accounted for losing and decided to defend anyway. The fleet kept trying to reach a breaking point that was not there. Let me give the reader the people of Calder as I came to know them, watching. There was a man named Aaron Pace, who had been the city's water engineer, and who kept the city's water flowing through 4 months of siege, under fire, because a besieged city dies of thirst before it dies of anything else. And Aaron Pace had decided that Calder would not die of thirst while he lived, and it did not, and he did not live to the end. And the man who took over the water after him had been his apprentice and kept it flowing the rest of the way, because Aaron Pace had taught him. Because these people always teach the ones who come after, because the teaching is how they refuse to be lost. There was a surgeon named Ruth Halloway, who operated for 4 months in a cellar, who lost more patients than any surgeon should have to, and saved more than anyone had a right to expect, and who, when the fleet's fire finally reached her cellar, was found to have shielded a wounded soldier with her own body, an act of no strategic value whatsoever, the kind of act my doctrine cannot account for, the kind of act these people commit so reliably that it is not even remarkable to them, only to me. Watching, unable to stop watching. And there was the moment that decided the siege, which was not a military moment at all, and which I have placed at the center of everything I understand about these people. In the 3rd month, with the city starving, with a third of its people dead, the fleet offered Calder a final chance to surrender, and broadcast the offer to the whole city, expecting that the suffering had finally reached the level where the people would override their leaders and break. And the city answered. Not its leaders, the city, the people, in a way these people have of answering together without anyone organizing it. They answered by raising on every standing wall of the city the names of their dead. Not flags, not weapons, names. They covered the walls of the dying city with the names of everyone Calder had lost, the whole accumulating ledger made visible, turned outward, shown to the fleet, and the message was unmistakable, and it was the most purely these people thing I witnessed in the entire war. The message was, these are the reasons we will not surrender. Every name is a reason. You have given us 500,000 reasons, and you are adding more every day, and each one binds us harder to this ground, and we will not leave them, and we will not forget them, and you cannot make us. And the longer you stay, the deeper the debt. So do your worst. We are already doing ours, which is to remember. The fleet broke off the siege of Calder in the 4th month. The official reason was the preservation of force. The true reason was that the fleet's soldiers had begun to understand what the names on the walls meant, had begun to feel the debt accumulating, had begun to break the way I have described my people breaking, against a wall that would not break and only grew more names. Calder held. Calder holds. It is a living city still, and the names that were raised on its walls in the 3rd month are carved there now, permanently, and the city did not take them down when the siege ended, because these people do not take down their dead, and the walls of Calder are a ledger 4 months and 500,000 reasons deep, and every child of that city learns to read on those walls, learns their letters from the names of the dead, which is the most these people thing of all. That they teach their children to read using the names of the lost, so that literacy itself, the very act of reading, is bound forever to the act of remembering, so that no one in Calder can ever read a single word without, somewhere beneath it, reading the dead. Archivist's note: I learned to read on the walls of Calder. I did not plan to tell the reader that, but the analyst's account has pulled it out of me, the way this whole document pulls the truth out of everyone it touches. It is true. The children of Calder still learn their letters from the names. I traced them with my finger as a child, not knowing they were the dead, and then I knew, and the knowing is part of how we are made. The analyst watched Calder refuse to fall and understood that it was not a military event but a teaching event, that the city was raising its dead to instruct both its enemy and its own unborn, and it was right. And I am the proof. A child who learned to read on the names and grew up to spend his life making sure the names are never lost. The siege of Calder is in the analyst's journal and in our histories and in my own hands every day in the classroom. The dead teach us to read. The reading teaches us to remember. The remembering makes us a people that cannot be conquered. And we would give it all back, every wall, to have them alive. We cannot, so we read their names, so we remember, so we go on. Witness record, one whole life in the war. I have given the reader the war in its great shapes, the bridge, the slope, Calder, the collapse of my own people, and in its single luminous moments, the letter, the question, the names on the walls. But I have not yet given the reader a whole life, start to finish, the way these people live and lose them, and I find I cannot close my witness without one, because the war was not made of shapes and moments. It was made of whole lives, hundreds of thousands of them, each complete, each irreplaceable, each one a world ending, and to render it only in shapes and moments is to do the thing my own people did, to measure the costume and miss the body. So here is one body. Here is one whole life. Her name was Cora Finch. She was 19 when Ashford burned, and she was nobody. I mean that as these people mean it with love, that she was an ordinary person of no rank or fame. A girl who worked in a bakery in a town a long way from anywhere important, who had a younger brother she half-raised because their mother worked 2 jobs, who was good at the small things and unremarkable at the large ones, who would have lived an entire quiet life and been mourned by a few dozen people and forgotten by history in the ordinary way. If the fleet had not come, I have reconstructed her life from the records these people keep, because these people keep the records of the nobodies as carefully as the records of the famous, which is itself one of the truest things about them. And I have come to love Cora Finch the way you love someone you have studied completely, which is to say more than I have words for in either of our languages. When Ashford burned, Cora Finch did not go to the war. I want this understood because the legend of these people makes them all into volunteers rushing to the front, and the truth is gentler and harder. She did not go. She had her brother to raise. Their mother had died in the 2nd month, not in battle, just in the ordinary collapse of a world at war, the hunger and the cold that kill the people the weapons miss. So Cora Finch stayed and raised her brother and worked and survived, and was, for 2 years of the war, simply one of the millions who endured rather than fought, who held the world together at home, so there would be a home to bring people back to. That is a kind of war too, the kind these people rarely put on their walls, and it is the kind most of them actually fight. And Cora Finch fought it well, kept a child alive and fed through 2 years of a war that was trying to kill them both by indirection. And that should have been her whole story, and it was not, because of what happened in the 3rd year. In the 3rd year, the fleet's collapse made them desperate, and a desperate superior force is at its most dangerous, and a raid struck the town where Cora Finch had kept her brother alive. It was not a battle. It was the kind of thing that has no name in the histories, a brief catastrophe in a small place, the fleet lashing out as it broke. And in it Cora Finch did the thing that these people do, the thing that was in her the whole time, under the bakery and the brother raising and the ordinary endurance, the thing that is in all of them waiting. She put her body between the raid and a group of children that included her brother, and she got them into a cellar, and she held the cellar door, and she did not survive it. She was 22. She had never fired a weapon in her life. She held a cellar door against the conquerors of 11 worlds with nothing but her body and the absolute refusal to let the children behind her be taken. And the children lived, all of them. Her brother lived. And Cora Finch did not, and that is the whole life, start to finish. A girl who worked in a bakery and died holding a door. I watched the records of it and I have never been the same, because Cora Finch is the answer to everything the Corps ever asked. The Corps wanted to know how to defeat these people, and the answer is that you cannot, and the reason you cannot is Cora Finch. Not the soldiers, not the generals, not the heroes on the walls, but the bakery girl who never wanted to fight and fought like the end of the world when the moment came for the only thing she ever cared about, which was the children behind the door. There are hundreds of thousands of Cora Finches in any of these people you might choose to conquer. They do not look like soldiers. They look like bakers and teachers and water engineers and mechanics, and they are, right up until the moment something tries to take their people. And then every one of them becomes the thing that held the cellar door, and you cannot win against a people who are all secretly, underneath their ordinary lives, exactly that. The Corps measured the soldiers. It never thought to measure the bakers. The bakers are the war. The bakers were always the war. Cora Finch was the war, and she never knew it. And she died not knowing she was the most unconquerable thing in the universe, a gentle girl who would not let the door be opened. And her brother is alive today, and has children, and they know her name, and they will not let her be lost. And that is how these people win. One held door at a time, forever, with their nobodies, with their bakers, with their Cora Finches, world without end. Archivist's note: Cora Finch is real, and her brother's line continues, and I have taught children descended from those cellar children, which is the kind of thing that stops being a coincidence here and starts being simply how we are woven. The analyst chose to end its witness not on a general or a battle, but on a bakery girl who held a door, and that choice is the analyst at its most fully one of us, because we have always known that the door holders are the truth of us, the ordinary people who become unstoppable for the length of exactly one moment, the only moment that matters, the moment when their people are behind the door. We do not put most of them on walls. There are too many. But we keep them, everyone, in the records of the nobodies that we keep as carefully as the records of kings, because no one is a nobody to a people that will not let anyone be lost. Cora Finch worked in a bakery and held a door and saved the children and died at 22, and an alien who came to destroy us made her the last whole life in its witness, because it understood at the end that she was the answer to the only question its people ever asked. You cannot conquer a world of Cora Finches. You can only be humbled by it, and if you are very lucky, as the analyst was, you can be taught by it and carried by it and kept. Witness record: the matter of prisoners. There is a chapter of the war I have not yet given the reader, and it is the one that most completely overturned what I expected, because it concerns the thing my doctrine is most certain about, and these people are most strange about, which is what is done with those who are taken alive. The Hennaki understanding of prisoners is, like everything in our doctrine, arithmetic. A captured enemy is a resource and a liability at once, a source of information, a bargaining piece, a drain on the force required to hold and feed him. Doctrine resolves the equation coldly. Extract what value the prisoner holds, expend no more than necessary in holding him, and dispose of him when his value falls below his cost. We do not mistreat prisoners for pleasure. That would be inefficient, a waste of effort on a thing already accounted for, but we do not preserve them past their utility either. The prisoner is a number like all the others, and when the number turns negative, the prisoner is released from the ledger. This is doctrine. I never questioned it. I had disposed of the calculation 40 times without feeling, and would have a 41st time without hesitation, before this world. These people, I discovered, do two things with prisoners that my doctrine cannot contain, and they do them at the same time, and the contradiction between them is the whole of these people compressed into a single behavior. The first thing, they will tear their own operations apart to recover their captured. I have described how they recover their dead and their wounded. Their captured they recover with the same insane disregard for cost, because a captured person is to them a person not yet brought home, and the bringing home is the war beneath the war. The fleet learned early that taking these people prisoner was nearly useless as leverage, because the threat against a prisoner did not make these people yield. It made them come in force past all sense to recover the one taken, and the recovering cost the fleet more than any prisoner was worth. The fleet had expected prisoners to be a lever. Instead, each prisoner became a debt, a summons, a reason for these people to do the thing they always did, which was to refuse to leave one of their own in enemy hands, whatever it cost. My people stopped taking prisoners eventually, not from mercy, but because prisoners were strategically catastrophic. Each one a hook these people would impale a whole operation upon to pull their person back. And the second thing, the contradictory thing, the thing I cannot reconcile and have stopped trying to. These people, who would burn the world to recover their own captured, treated the prisoners they themselves took with a care that my doctrine finds simply incomprehensible. They fed their Hennaki prisoners from their own starving stores. They treated Hennaki wounded with the same surgeons who were short of everything, spending on the enemy the medicine their own people died wanting. I watched this and could not believe it, and confirmed it and still could not believe it. A people fighting for survival who had lost a generation, who had every reason and every right to dispose of their enemy prisoners by the cold arithmetic my own people would have used. These people fed them, healed them, kept them alive at direct cost to their own survival, for no strategic gain whatsoever because, and this is the reason, the only reason, and it undoes me, because a prisoner, even an enemy prisoner, even one of the monsters who had burned Ashford, was to these people a person in their keeping, and they do not abandon the people in their keeping, and the category of people in their keeping was, to them, terrifyingly large enough to include the enemy that was trying to exterminate them. I was myself a person in their keeping at the end. I understand the behavior from the inside now, having been its object. It is not weakness, and it is not strategy, and it is not even, exactly, mercy in the way my language means mercy. It is the same refusal that makes them unconquerable, pointed in the one direction my doctrine never imagined it could point, at the enemy. They will not leave their own. And once you are in their keeping, by the strange, enormous logic of these people, you become their own, even if you came to destroy them, and they will not leave you either. It is the most dangerous generosity in the universe, because it means these people cannot be made monstrous even by a war of extermination. They fed the ones who came to exterminate them, and a people who cannot be made monstrous by any pressure is a people who has won something far deeper than the war, something my people did not even know was a thing that could be won. Archivists note, we fed our prisoners from our starving stores. It is in our histories, and the analyst confirms it from the other side, which matters, because it is the kind of thing a people tells about itself too flatteringly, and here is the enemy confirming it was true. I will add only the hard part, the part the analyst gestures at and does not fully press. It was not universal, and it was not easy, and there were those among us who could not do it, who wanted the cold arithmetic, who had lost too much to feed the ones who had taken everything. The feeding of the enemy was a choice made against a strong and understandable current, made by people who had to override their own grief to make it, and it was made anyway often enough, widely enough, that it became who we were in that war. That is the part worth keeping. Not that we were gentle easily, but that we chose gentleness hard, against the pull of our own wounds, and kept choosing it. And the choosing is the thing. The choosing is always the thing. It is never the absence of the darker pull, but the daily refusal of it. And an alien we were feeding understood that the refusal was the whole of us, and was right. Witness record, the descent. I could no longer assess from orbit. I had been stripped of my function, my ship was being recalled, and I made a choice that I knew was final the moment I made it. I did not return with the ship. I took a survey craft, the small kind an analyst uses to gather close data, and I went down to the surface of the world that named itself the ground, because I had spent a season and more watching these people through instruments, and I could not bear to leave without standing among them once, even if standing among them killed me, which I assumed it would. I was the enemy. I was, in a real sense, the author of Ashford, the analyst whose fourth-day number had summoned the fleet. If these people understood who I was, the debt I represented was beyond counting. I went down anyway. I had become, by then, enough like them that I did the thing despite the fear running at full volume the whole way down, exactly as I had read in 100 of their accounts. I came down near the town where Margaret Vey had said asterisk, now we will show them what we are. I do not fully know why I chose it. I think I wanted to see the place where I had first understood that the war was lost, the place where a schoolteacher's sentence had told me the truth my own people would not hear. The town had been touched by the war the way every place had. There were new graves. There were buildings that were gone. There was the particular quiet of a place that has set down its grief to free its hands. And there were people living, working, going on in the way these people go on, the grief never gone, never forgot, but set down, carried, survivable. They found me within an hour. Of course they did. I was not built to hide among them. I will record what happened, because it is the center of everything I have left, and because it is the thing I most want remembered, more than the bridges and the mountains and the collapse of my own people. A group of them surrounded my craft, armed, and I came out, because hiding was beneath the thing I had come to do, and I stood in front of them, the enemy, the author of their dead, and I waited for the debt to be collected. It was not collected. I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand the hour that followed, and I am not sure I understand it yet, and I have come to think that not understanding it is correct, that it is a thing that cannot be fully understood from inside a Hennaki mind, only witnessed and recorded and held. They did not kill me. They saw what I was, an enemy, alone, far from its own, and an old woman came forward through the armed group, and I learned later that she had lost people in the war, that there was no one in that town who had not, that I was standing in front of a people who had every reason and every right to collect from me the entire weight of Ashford. And the old woman looked at me for a long time, and then she asked me a question, through the translation device I carried, and the question was not who are you or why are you here or how many did you kill. The question was, are you hungry? Archivist's note. I have read this passage perhaps 1,000 times, and it undoes me every time. The old woman's name was recorded. She was a relative of the vase, because everyone in that town was, by then, related through the dead. And she looked at the enemy that had come down out of the sky that had burned Ashford, and she asked it if it was hungry. I want to be careful not to make us sound better than we are. The analyst is clear elsewhere that we are not a gentle people, that our mercy and our terrible memory live in the same body. But this happened. A people that does not forget its dead, that collects every debt, that cannot be conquered because it will not stop bleeding for its own. That same people looked at its enemy, alone and far from home, and the first thing it thought to ask was whether the enemy needed feeding. Both of those are us, the unforgetting and the feeding. The analyst spent a whole journal learning the first one. It learned the second one in a single sentence from an old woman, and I think it is the sentence that made it decide to do what it did with this document, because right here in his record, the tone changes and never changes back. Witness record, the months in the town. They let me stay. I will not pretend it was simple or that it was peace. There were those in the town who could not look at me, who left a room when I entered it, whose grief was too fresh and too specific to sit in the same space as a thing that wore the shape of the enemy. I understood them better than I understood the ones who fed me. Their refusal was the sane response. The feeding was the mystery. But the town as a whole made a decision about me, the way these people make decisions, not in a vote or a council but in a slow settling of 1,000 small choices, and the decision was that I would be allowed to live among them as a witness, on the condition, never stated but everywhere understood, that I would remember, that I would carry what I saw, that I would not let it be forgotten. They are a people who turn everyone they can into a keeper of their dead, and they turned me into one, the enemy, and it was the gentlest conquest in the history of either of our peoples, and it was total. I learned, in those months, the thing I could not measure from orbit, the thing beneath all the things I had correctly identified and wrongly weighed. I had learned that these people do not break, that they hold their dead, that they fight to bring their people home, that fear and action run on separate channels in them. All of that was true, and all of it was surface. The thing beneath it, the thing I learned by living among them and could have learned no other way, was this: the unbreakability is not the point. The unbreakability is a side effect. These people would give anything. They say it constantly, in their letters, in their grief, in the words of Thomas Caro begging not to be brought home at any cost. These people would give anything not to have to be unbreakable. The strength I had spent a season fearing was not a thing they wanted. It was a thing they were, because of a deeper thing they could not stop being, which was a people who love each other past the point of sense and cannot, will not, leave each other behind, in life or in death, ever, no matter the cost. The whole terrible engine of their unconquerability was just love with nowhere acceptable to stop. That was the variable. That was the thing my doctrine had no symbol for, the thing I had circled for 26 days and witnessed for a season and finally understood only by being fed by an old woman who had every reason to kill me. They do not fight because they are strong. They are strong because they refuse to stop loving their dead, and a people that will not stop loving its dead cannot be defeated, because defeat would require them to let go. And letting go is the one thing they have decided, as a species, across their whole history, that they will not do. I watched the children of the town learn it. That was the part that finished my education. The grief is taught, deliberately, generation to generation. I had seen this from orbit and called it the long memory and named it a weapon. From inside the town I saw what it actually was. It was not soldiers being made. It was love being extended backward in time, taught to children so that the children would hold the dead they never met, so that no one ever would be truly lost as long as someone remembered. The schoolteacher's profession, I understood at last, was the most military profession these people had, more than any soldiers, because the schoolteacher is the one who teaches the children to carry the dead, and the carrying of the dead is the whole war, the only war, the war beneath all the wars. Margaret Vey had been a schoolteacher. Of course she had. The most dangerous person in the war to my people had been a woman whose life's work was teaching children to remember. Because that work, done across enough generations, makes a people that the universe cannot kill, not because they cannot be killed, but because they cannot be made to forget. And a people that cannot be made to forget has already won every war it will ever fight, in advance forever. At a price it pays in grief every single day, and would give anything not to have to pay and pays anyway. Because the alternative is to let someone be lost, and they will not, they will not, they will not. Archivist's note, he got it. Here in the town, fed by the enemy he had come to be killed by, he got the whole of it, deeper than our own histories usually put it, that we are not strong, we are loving, and the strength is only what the love looks like when something tries to take our people from us. I teach. I should say that here, because it is why this passage matters to me beyond all the others. I am a teacher like Margaret Vey, and my work is the work he describes, teaching children to carry the dead they never met, to hold Ashford and the long slope and Thomas Carrow, to remember. The analyst understood that this teaching is the true weapon, the thing beneath the unbreakability, and he understood, which we sometimes forget, that it is not a thing to be proud of so much as a thing to be born. We would give anything not to need it. We need it, so we teach it. And an alien who came to measure us for destruction learned it well enough to spend its life as one of its keepers. Witness record, the children. In my years among these people, in the peace, I gave particular attention to the children, because the Corps had taught me that a people's future lives in how it raises its young, and because I had come to understand that these people's deepest weapon and deepest wound were both transmitted the same way, through the generations, by teaching, and I wanted to watch the transmission happen with my own eyes, since I had spent so long understanding it only as an abstraction on the walls of Calder. The children born after the war inherited a world that had lost a generation. There was not a child in the town that fed me who did not have empty places in their family, names they were taught before they could understand what a name was, dead they would carry their whole lives without ever having met. By the cold reasoning I was born to, this is a kind of damage, a generation raised in the shadow of mass death, taught grief before they were taught arithmetic, their childhoods weighted with losses that were not even their own. My doctrine would predict that such children grow up broken, or hardened, or haunted, that a people transmits its trauma to its young, and the young are diminished by the inheritance. That is not what I watched happen. I watched something far stranger, and I have thought about it more than almost anything else I observed, because it is the final secret of how these people endure, the mechanism by which a people that should be crushed by its own accumulated grief instead grows, generation by generation, stronger and gentler at once. The children were taught the dead, yes, but they were not taught the dead as wounds. They were taught the dead as people, as stories, as jokes, as habits and sayings and small beloved details, so that a child who never met a grandmother killed at Ashford nonetheless knew how that grandmother laughed, what she said when she was annoyed, the song she sang while she worked. The dead were kept present not as absences but as presences, carried forward not as grief alone, but as love with the grief inside it, and the children inherited not a wound but a fullness, a family larger than the living, a world densely populated by people they would carry forever and had never met and loved anyway. The grief was real and it was taught honestly. These people do not lie to their children about death. But the grief came wrapped around a gift, the gift of the person preserved, and the children took both, the grief and the gift, in the same hands, the way these people take everything, and they were not diminished by it. They were enlarged. This is the transmission I had failed to understand from the walls of Calder. I had seen the names and understood that these people teach their dead to their young, and I had called it the long memory and named it a weapon, and it is a weapon, but I had missed what it actually felt like from inside, which is not a burden laid on children but an inheritance given to them, the inheritance of belonging to something larger than their own brief lives, of being one link in a chain of carrying that runs backward into the deep past and forward into the unborn future, of never being alone because the dead are present, and never being final because the children will carry you in turn. A child raised this way is not haunted. A child raised this way is held by a whole population of the loved dead, and taught from birth that they, too, will be held, will be carried, will not be lost. It is the opposite of trauma. It is the deepest security a mind can have, the security of knowing you belong to a people that does not let its own be lost ever, that will carry you forward through whatever comes, that has been carrying its own forward through worse than you will ever face, and has never once dropped anyone, and never will. This is why they do not break. I had circled the answer for the whole war and found it, at last, in the children of the peace. They do not break because no individual among them is ever truly alone, ever truly final, ever truly able to be lost. Each of them is held by the whole weight of the carried dead and the promise of the carrying young, and a person held like that has a kind of strength that force simply cannot touch, because force can kill a body but it cannot make a held person feel abandoned, and abandonment, not death, is the only thing these people truly fear. And it is the one thing they have made structurally impossible among themselves. They have abolished abandonment. That is their civilization's single great achievement, the thing under all the other things. They have built a people in which no one can be abandoned, living or dead, and a people that has abolished abandonment has abolished the breaking point, because the breaking point was always, in every species, the moment the individual feels finally alone, and these people have made that moment impossible, and so they cannot break, and so they cannot be conquered. And so an alien sent to measure them spent a war failing to find a breaking point that they had engineered out of existence generations before he ever arrived, with nothing more sophisticated than the decision to teach their children the names of the dead. Archivist's note: I was a child raised this way. I have tried in these notes to be a witness, and not only a son and a partner and a teacher, but the analyst has reached the thing I cannot be objective about, because it made me. I was held by the dead before I knew it. I learned the names, the laughs, the songs. I was never alone, not even in my worst grief, because I belonged to the carrying, and when my partner died, I discovered that the carrying held me even then, that I had been being prepared for it my whole life without knowing, that a people had built, across all its history, exactly the strength I would need on the worst day of my life, and handed it to me as a child in the form of names on a wall. The analyst understood that this is our great achievement, not the holding of bridges, but the abolition of abandonment. We do not let each other be alone. That is all. That is everything. It is why we cannot be conquered and why we are worth not conquering, and an enemy learned it by watching our children and became, himself, one of the never abandoned, one of the carried, one of us. Witness record, the end of the war. The war did not end in a battle. I want this understood, because these people even now sometimes tell it as though it ended in a great victory, and it did not, because there was no victory to be had in the way the word is usually meant. The war ended the way a fever ends, the way a thing that cannot be sustained simply stops being sustained. The Hennaki fleet, season by season, lost the one thing it had brought that these people could not match, which was not force. Its force was intact to the end, but the will to keep spending its force into a wall that would not break. The fleet broke. The conquerors of 11 worlds broke, and the breaking was quiet, administrative, a series of withdrawals each justified by the arithmetic of preserving force, until the withdrawals had withdrawn the entire fleet from the world it had come to take, and the war was over, and no document was signed, because these people had nothing to sign, and the Hennaki could not admit there was anything to sign, and so the war simply stopped. With both peoples changed forever, and neither able to say the word that named what had happened. I witnessed the fleet's final departure from the surface, standing in the town that had fed me, among people who had lost more than I could count, and who watched the sky empty of the thing that had burned Ashford with no celebration that I could see, only a long exhalation, a settling, the particular stillness of a people setting down one more enormous grief to free its hands for the work of going on. They did not cheer. I had expected cheering. I did not yet fully understand them even then. They did not cheer because there was nothing to cheer. They had not won anything. They had only kept what was theirs at a price that had emptied a generation, and a people does not cheer for that. A people stands in the quiet and feels the whole weight of it, and then, in the way I had come to love and fear in equal measure, sets it down where it can be picked back up, and turns to the living and begins again. I must record what the war cost in the only honest accounting, which is both ledgers at once, the way I had learned to keep them. On the Hennaki side, the cost was the thing my people will never speak of, the discovery that we are not what we believed, that our unbreakability was always conditional, that we break when we meet a thing that does not, and that there are peoples in the universe before whom our whole doctrine is not merely wrong but irrelevant. We lost the war, but more than the war, we lost the story we told ourselves about what we were, and a people that loses that story is wounded in a way that no withdrawal preserves. The Hennaki who came home from this world came home broken in the place where their certainty had been, and I do not know what my people became after that, because I never went home. But I know they did not come home conquerors, and I know the story of the 11 easy worlds could never again be told the same way, because there was now a 12th world that the story could not contain. And on the side of these people the cost was everything the word can hold, a generation in the ground, Ashford, which is not a city anymore but a word, a wound, a date. The long slope, the mountains full of the dead they would not leave. Thomas Carow, brought home against his wish at the cost of 2 more. Margaret Vey, who did not live to see the fleet depart, who fell in the 2nd season doing the work the school teachers did, which was every kind of work, because in a war to bring your people home there is no one who is not a soldier. These people won, if it is winning, and the winning cost them the thing that winning always costs them, which is more than they could afford and which they paid anyway, because the alternative was to let their people be lost, and they will not. They have never once in their history been able to, and that inability is the whole of their strength and the whole of their grief, and the two have never been separable and never will be. Archivist's note: this is the truest account of the war's end I have ever read, and it is an enemy's. We do tell it as a victory sometimes, and the analyst is gently, devastatingly correct that it was not. We kept what was ours. That is all. We kept our ground and our dead and our refusal to forget, and it cost us a generation, and there was no signing and no triumph, only the sky going empty and a people setting down one more unbearable thing. I think the reason we sometimes call it a victory is that the truth is too heavy to carry at full weight all the time, and so we let it scar over into a story with a shape, the way you have to. The analyst would not let it scar. It kept the wound open in this document on purpose, the way we keep our wounds open because it had become one of us. It kept the truest version so that we would always be able to find it when we were ready to bear it. I was ready, finally. That is why I have spent 11 years giving it back its voice. Witness record, what became of my people? I never returned to the Hennaki, and so I cannot give the reader a witness's account of what the war did to my own people in the way I have given an account of what it did to these. But I can reason from what I know, and I knew my people well before I learned to love another, and I want to record what I believe happened to the Hennaki after the fleet withdrew, because it is part of the truth, and because these people, who keep even their enemies dead, would want the enemy's grief recorded alongside their own. The Hennaki came home from this world broken in a place we had never been broken before. I have said this. I want now to say what I think the breaking did. Across the years I was not there to see. The core doctrine, the whole apparatus of assessment and threshold and conquest by forgetting, rested on a single belief, which this world destroyed. The belief that every people can be conquered, that force correctly applied always finds a breaking point, that we are the apex because we are willing to do the arithmetic others will not. This world proved the belief false. It proved that there exists at least one people who cannot be conquered by any force, who have removed themselves from the reach of our entire doctrine, and a belief that has been proven false once can never again be held with the same certainty. The Corps came home knowing that its central faith was a lie, and a people that has lost its central faith does not simply find a new one. It wanders. It doubts. It turns the terrible questions inward, against itself, the way it once turned force outward against others. I believe, I cannot prove, but I believe, that the Hennaki, after this world, began to ask the question these people had forced upon us, the question our doctrine had been constructed specifically to avoid. Not can this people be conquered, but should any people be conquered? And beneath that, what are we that we have spent our history conquering? And beneath that, the deepest and most dangerous question, the one these people had answered long ago and we had never even asked. What is worth dying for, and what is worth refusing to kill for? These people knew the answer to those questions in their bones, in the ground they named themselves after, in the dead they would not leave. We had never asked them, because asking them would have unmade the doctrine, and now the doctrine was unmade anyway, and the questions were loose in my people, and I believe they have been answering them ever since, slowly, painfully, the way a people answers the questions it has avoided for its whole history once it can no longer avoid them. If I am right, then these people did something to the Hennaki far larger than defeating a fleet. They infected us with their own deepest question. They are a people who teach. I have said this many times, and without meaning to, without wanting to, simply by being unconquerable in the specific way they are unconquerable, they taught my people the lesson they teach their own children, the lesson carried on the walls of Calder and in the names of the dead, that there are things worth more than victory, that the refusal to lose your people is stronger than any force, that a civilization is measured not by what it can conquer but by what it will not abandon. My people came to this world to teach these people a lesson about force. They learned instead the lesson these people teach, and I believe it is remaking them, and I believe that someday, generations from now, the Hennaki may become a people these people would recognize, a people who carries its dead and asks what is worth dying for. And if that happens, it will be the strangest victory in the history of either of our kinds, because it will be these people conquering the Hennaki not with force, but with the only weapon they ever truly had, which is the example of what they are, which is the most contagious thing in the universe, which is a people who will not let each other be lost, witnessed by a people who had let each other be lost for their whole history, and never knew there was another way until they met the ones who had never known any other way at all. Archivists note, we do not know what became of the Hennaki. They never came again, and we have never gone looking, and the analyst's reasoning about their fate is exactly that, reasoning, an exile imagining the home it never returned to. But I find that I hope he was right. I find that I hope, somewhere out in the dark, there is a people who came to destroy us and went home carrying our deepest question like a seed, and that the question is growing in them the way the tree grows over my partner, the way the gentle thing grows inside the shell. The analyst spent its life as our keeper. The least we can do is keep its hope for its own people, carry that too, set it down beside the rest. Maybe the Hennaki are becoming something that would recognize us. Maybe the war's last and strangest casualty was their certainty that the strong conquer the gentle, and maybe out of that casualty something gentle is growing, fed by an enemy that learned to love us. I do not know. I keep the hope anyway. He taught me how. Witness record, the first piece. I had measured these people in war. I had not measured them in peace, and I want to record what peace did to them, because it surprised me as much as the war did, and because it completes the picture in a way that war alone cannot. I expected when the fleet withdrew and the war ended that these people would celebrate, and I have written that they did not. But I expected more than that. I expected, having watched them be unbreakable in war, that they would carry the unbreakability into peace, that a people forged so hard by so much loss would become hard, would turn the terrible strength I had witnessed against each other, against the world, against the future. This is what happens to my people after our wars. The hardness we bring to conquest does not soften when the conquest ends, and our pieces are only quieter wars. I assumed these people would be the same, only more so, because they had suffered more. They were not the same. This is the thing I most want the reader to understand about peace, and it is the inverse of everything I expected. When the war ended, these people did not stay hard. They softened, deliberately, immediately, with a speed and a completeness that astonished me, and I watched the softening happen in the town that had fed me, and I came to understand that the softening was not a weakness that followed their strength but the entire purpose of their strength, the thing the strength had always been for. They had been unbreakable in war so that they could be gentle in peace. That is the resolution of the whole paradox I had been measuring. The terrible strength, the not breaking, the not forgetting, the burning of any quantity of force to bring their people home. All of it existed in service of a single goal, which was to protect a way of being that was, at its core, not hard at all but almost unbearably tender. They fought like that so that they could live like this, planting things, teaching children, repairing what was broken, sitting with each other in the evenings, telling the jokes that had warmed them on the bridge now warming them in safety, carrying their dead not as a war burden but as a kind of ongoing love, a way of keeping the lost present at the table. The hardness was the shell. The tenderness was the creature inside it. I had spent a war studying the shell and calling it the animal. In peace, I finally saw the animal, and it was the gentlest thing I have ever encountered, and the shell existed only to keep the gentle thing alive in a universe that kept trying to kill it. I watched an old man in the town teach a child to plant a tree in the first season of the piece on the ground where the town had buried its war dead. The tree was for one of the dead. These people plant the living over their lost, so that the lost feed the living, so that grief becomes literally growth. And the old man's hands on the child's hands, guiding them in the dirt, were the same hands, the same people, the same species that had held Calder for 4 months and broken the conquerors of 11 worlds. The hands that would not break were planting a tree. The people who could not be conquered were teaching a child to garden over the grave of someone they had loved. And I understood, watching, that this was what it had all been for, not the holding of bridges, not the breaking of fleets, but this, the hands in the dirt, the child learning, the tree going in over the dead, the gentle thing surviving one more season inside the shell that the war had been built to provide. They are not a warrior people. I had it wrong from the first day to nearly the last. They are a gardening people, a teaching people, a sitting together in the evening people who have learned to fight like nothing else in the universe for the sole purpose of being allowed to keep gardening and teaching and sitting together, and who would put down every weapon they have, gladly forever, the instant the universe let them, and who will never be allowed to, because the universe does not let the gentle keep their gardens without making them pay in blood, and so they pay, and remain gentle underneath. Which is the bravest thing of all, braver than any holding, the refusal to let the necessary hardness reach all the way down and turn the gentle thing hard too. Archivist's note, we plant the living over the dead, it is still done. There is a tree for my partner, planted by my own hands over the place where I keep their ashes, and it is large now, and I sit under it, and that is where I do much of this work in its shade, which I did not plan to tell the reader, and the analyst's account has pulled out of me as it pulls everything. He understood, in peace, the thing about us that even we forget when we are busy being strong, that the strength was always for the sake of the gentleness, that we are not hard, we are gentle things that have learned to be hard only so the gentleness can survive, and that we would lay it all down in an instant if we could. He watched an old man teach a child to plant a tree over the war dead, and he understood the entire meaning of us, the whole point of all the holding and all the dying, which was this, only ever this, the hands in the dirt, the child learning, the gentle thing going on. He came to destroy that. He stayed to tend it. He has a tree too in the town's ground. They planted it over him. Something gentle is growing there now, fed by the enemy who learned at the last to be one of us. Witness record, the years after. I lived among these people for the rest of my life. I want to set down what that life was, because the Corps, if it ever reads this, will want to believe I was a prisoner, and I was not, and the truth is stranger and harder than captivity. I was a guest who could not leave and did not wish to. The town that fed me became the place I belonged, the only place in the universe where a thing like me, the enemy, the author of Ashford, could be known completely and allowed to remain. They never forgot what I was. That is the thing the Corps will not understand. They never once forgot that I had filed the number that brought the fleet, that I carried a share of every grave in that ground. They are people who do not forget. And they let me stay anyway, not by forgetting my debt but by holding it, fully, the way they hold everything, and choosing, with the debt in full view, to feed me and shelter me and finally to trust me, and the choosing was harder and truer than any forgetting could have been. A forgiveness that forgets is cheap. These people do not have it. What they gave me was the other thing, the expensive thing, the forgiveness that remembers everything and stays anyway, and I did not know such a thing existed until they gave it to me, and I have never deserved it, and they gave it regardless, because that too is what they are. I became, in those years, a keeper. The role found me the way roles find people in their towns, through a slow accretion of small needs. I had watched the war more completely than anyone alive, from a vantage no human had held. I knew things no survivor knew, had seen the shape of the whole when each of them had seen only their own piece of it. And so I became a kind of memory for them, the one who could tell a family how their soldier's position had mattered, who could connect a death here to a holding there, who could give the scattered griefs their place in the whole. I had come to measure these people for destruction, and I stayed to help them carry their dead, and the symmetry of that is not lost on me, and I have stopped trying to make it mean something clean, because these people taught me that the truest things do not resolve, that you hold the contradiction the way you hold the grief, set down but never forgotten, carried but never closed. I knew I would not live as long as the work required. My kind do not live as long as these people, and even among my kind I was no longer young when I came down out of the sky. And so I began in my last years to prepare this document, to gather the assessment journal and the witness record, and to make of them a single thing that could be left behind, because I had become a keeper of these people's dead, and I understood that a keeper must, in the end, become one of the dead he keeps, and arrange to be remembered in turn, or the chain breaks. I prepared the journal so that it would survive me. I made copies. I taught the townspeople where it was and what it was and why it mattered, and they listened, because they are a people who listen to such things, who know that a record is a kind of grave and that a grave is a kind of promise. I will not be alive when this is read. That is the strangest sentence I have ever written, and I write it calmly, here near the end, among a people who have taught me how to look at my own death fully, and set it down beside everything else I carry. I am not afraid, or rather I am afraid, fully the way they are, the fear running at its full volume, and I am writing anyway, the action running at its full volume too, the two on their separate channels, exactly as I described on day 14 when I thought I was describing an enemy and was, I understand now, describing the thing I would become. I learned to be one of them. I learned it completely. And the last thing I will do as one of them is the most one of them thing there is. I will leave my dead, these people, my people now, in the safest grave I can build, which is a record that does not forget, and I will trust the keepers who come after to find it and to carry what I carried, the way these people have always trusted the unborn to carry the dead they never met. Archivist's note. He died among them in the town, an old thing far from a home it had chosen never to return to. They buried him. I have stood at the grave. It is in the town's ground, among the Vays and the Carrows and the others. The enemy laid down among the people he had been sent to destroy and had stayed to remember, and the stone gives his name, Vorn Teshuel, and beneath it a single line that the town chose, and the line is, he learned to carry U.S. I did not understand the first time I stood there how completely that was true. I understand now. He is one of our dead. We keep him the way we keep all of them, and his journal is the proof that the keeping works, that no one who is truly held is ever fully lost, not even the enemy, not even the one who brought the fleet. We did not forget what he did. We carry it, and we carry him, both, always both. That is the whole of what he learned, and the whole of what we are, and the reason I have given my life to giving him his voice back. Witness record, the weight I carry. I have been an honest witness about these people. I must now be an honest witness about myself, because the document is incomplete without it, and because these people taught me that the keeper of an account must include their own part in it, or the account is a lie of innocence. I caused Ashford. I want this written plainly in my own hand where it cannot be softened. The fleet came on the strength of the low threshold I filed on my 4th day, before I understood anything, when I looked at these people's inefficient wars and their hopeless holdings and their celebrated failures, and I concluded, with the casual certainty of 40 easy assessments behind me, that they were weak. That number summoned the fleet. That number chose Ashford. 2 million people died in the demonstration that my 4th day ignorance made possible, and every death in the war that followed traces back, through the fleet, to the number I filed, and there is no honest way for me to hold this account without holding that. I have lived among these people knowing this. They have known it too, they never forgot it, as I have said. They are not a people who forgets. And the thing I must record, the thing that is the hardest of all the hard things in this document, is what these people did with my guilt, because it is the final lesson, and I did not learn it until I had lived among them for years. I expected when I came down to be punished, and I was not, and I have written about that. But I expected something else too, something subtler which I did not get either, and the not getting of it taught me the last thing. I expected that, having spared me, these people would then need me to be forgiven, that they would, over time, find ways to tell me it was not my fault, that I had not known, that the fleet would have come regardless, that I should set down my guilt. This is what my own people would have done. We are a people who resolve things, who close accounts, who do not like an open ledger. I expected these people to close my ledger for me, to forgive me in the way that means forget, to help me put the weight down. They never did. And I understand now that their refusal to do it was the deepest kindness and the deepest respect they could have shown me. They did not tell me it was not my fault. because it was my fault, and they are not a people who lies about the dead to comfort the living. They did not help me put the weight down, because they do not believe the weight is meant to be put down. They carry their own forever, and they recognized that I had become one of them. And so they let me carry mine fully the way they carry theirs, set down beside the rest but never closed, never forgotten, never resolved into the false peace of it was not your fault. It was my fault. They knew it, I knew it. And they let me live among them and feed beside them and become a keeper of their dead, while never once pretending that I was not also the author of a great many of those dead, and the holding of both of those truths at once, without resolving either, is the most these people thing they ever taught me, and it is the thing I most want the reader to understand about what these people are. They do not forgive in the way that erases. They forgive in the way that remembers. They looked at the enemy who had killed their millions, and they did not absolve me, and they did not punish me. They did the third thing, the thing that has no name in my language, the thing that is the whole of them. They let me carry my guilt alongside their grief, in the same hands as part of the same load, and they let me help carry the load, guilt and all, because to them the carrying was never about who was innocent. It was only ever about not letting anyone be lost. And I, the author of Ashford, was someone who could be lost, and so they refused to lose me, guilt and all, and made me a keeper, guilt and all, and let me spend my life remembering the dead I had helped create, which is not punishment and not forgiveness, but something larger than both, something I have no word for, something I have spent the rest of my life trying to be worthy of and never will, and that not being worthy is, I have come to understand, also part of what I carry. Set down beside the rest, never closed. Archivist's note. This is the passage I most needed in my own grief, and it is about guilt rather than loss, and I did not understand at first why it helped me until I had read it many times. It helped me because it names the thing we do that even we cannot usually name, that we do not forgive by forgetting, that we hold the wrong and the love in the same hands, that our refusal to lose anyone extends even to those who wronged us, even to the enemy, even to the author of our dead. We did not absolve him. We could not. It would have been a lie. We did the harder thing. We let him carry his guilt forever with us, as one of us, because losing him would have been one more loss, and we do not accept losses, not even of the guilty, not even of the enemy. I have done the same with my own smaller guilts, the things I did not do for my partner before the end, the words I did not say. I do not get to put them down. I carry them beside the love in the same hands. The analyst taught me that this is not a failure to heal. It is the shape of faithfulness. It is what we are. I have stayed at the edges of this document, entering only to correct the analyst, because that is what an archivist is supposed to do. But I have come to believe that the analyst would not want me to stay at the edges, because the analyst learned, in its years among us, that no account is complete that hides its keeper, that the one who carries the dead must let themselves be seen carrying them, or the carrying becomes a lie of objectivity. So I will step forward once fully, and tell the reader who has been correcting Vorn Teschel all this time, and why. My name is Ellis Crane. I am a teacher, as I have said, and an archivist, and I am descended. I did not know this when I began the work, and learned it in the third year, and it nearly stopped me. I am descended from the town that fed the analyst. The old woman who asked the enemy if it was hungry was my great-great-grandmother's sister. I did not seek this document because of that connection. The connection found me inside the work, the way connections always find us here, because we are all related through the dead, exactly as the analyst observed. But once I knew it, I could not unknow it, and the work changed. I was no longer annotating an alien's journal. I was carrying my own family's dead, and the enemy my family had fed, and the enemy had become, across 11 years, one of the dead I carry, which is a sentence I could not have written when I began and cannot stop writing now. I lost someone before this work. I will say it plainly because the analyst taught me through this journal that the plain saying is the only honest one. I lost my partner years ago, Not to any war, to the ordinary catastrophe of illness, the kind that comes for people in times of peace and is no less total for being quiet. And I did the thing our people do, the thing the analysts spent a journal learning we do. I sat with the grief, and I could not set it down, and for a long time my hands were not free. I came to this document in that time, not looking for comfort, because we do not believe grief is a thing to be comforted away, but looking for company, for the sound of someone else who had learned what I was learning, which is that you do not get over the people you love, you carry them, and the carrying does not lighten, and that this is not a failure to heal but the truest form of faithfulness there is. And I found, in the journal of an alien sent to destroy my people, the best account I have ever read of how to carry a death. Vorn Teschel learned it from us, from my own family's town, and then it gave it back, refined by an outsider's clarity, in words my own grieving people rarely manage because we are too close to say it as cleanly. That the ones we lose are not gone if we refuse to let them be lost, that the refusal costs us everything and is worth everything, that grief and love are the same substance, and that to stop grieving would be to stop loving, and we will not. We will not. We will not. I read those words, the analyst's words, my own people's truth spoken back to me by our enemy, and my hands came free. Not because the grief lightened. Because I understood, finally, that the weight was not a thing to be put down, but a thing to be carried forward, given to others, taught to children, made into a record that does not forget, and that carrying it that way was not a burden I was failing to escape, but the most important work a person can do, the work Margaret Vey died doing, the work the analyst spent its last years doing, the work I have given my life to. So when I tell the reader that I have spent 11 years giving this document its voice, understand what I am really telling you. I have spent 11 years carrying my dead, and my family's dead, and an enemy who became one of us, and turning all of it into a thing that will not forget, so that the chain does not break, so that the keepers who come after me will find it and carry it in turn. That is the whole of what we are, the thing the analyst was sent to measure and stayed to become. We are the people who carry our dead forward forever. At a cost we would give anything not to pay, and pay anyway because the alternative is to let them be lost, and we have decided, across our whole history in every generation, one grieving teacher at a time, that no one we love will ever be lost as long as someone remembers. I remember. That is my function. It was the analyst's function too at the end. It is the most human function there is, and it was performed faithfully to the last, by a thing that was not human because we taught it how, because teaching it how is what we do, because we cannot help ourselves, because it is what we are. There is no archivist's note on this passage. It is the note. Final entry. I do not number it by day because I have stopped counting days, the way these people stop counting once a thing becomes permanent. This is the last thing I will write, and I know it is the last thing, the way these people seem to know, the body telling its quiet truth, and I have spent my life serving the truth, so I will not refuse this one. I came to this world to write a number. I want to end where I began because these people have taught me that the truest accounts come back to their beginnings changed, that the ending should repeat the opening in a different key, so that you can measure in the distance between them how far the telling has carried you. So, I came to this world to write a number, the threshold, the cost of taking these people. I was the best the Corps had ever produced at writing that number. I had never been wrong. And I will set down now the number I should have written on my first day, if I had been wise instead of merely skilled, the number that is the only true measure of these people, the number I spent a lifetime learning. The number is all of it. The cost of taking these people is all of it, everything you have, everything you are, every certainty your civilization rests on, and even then you do not take them, you only break yourself against them and call the breaking a war. That is the threshold. It cannot be paid. Not because these people are strong in the way the Corps measures strength, but because they have rooted their whole existence in a place that force cannot reach, the place where they keep their dead, the place where they refuse to leave each other, the place where a schoolteacher's sentence is stronger than a fleet, and the names on a wall are stronger than a siege, and a joke on a frozen bridge is stronger than the cold that is killing the ones who laugh. You cannot take that place. You can only be changed by having seen it, the way I was changed, the way I believe my whole people were changed, the way anything is changed that comes close enough to these people to understand what they are. I misunderstood everything on my first day, and I want to name the misunderstanding exactly, because it is the misunderstanding my whole civilization made, the one that brought the fleet, the one that killed 2 million people at Ashford and a generation across this world. I thought I was studying human warfare. I spent weeks studying it, the tactics and the engagements and the strange, inefficient holdings, and I built my assessment on what I learned, and I was wrong, completely wrong, because it was never warfare I was studying. These people's wars are not warfare. They are something else wearing the costume of warfare, and I measured the costume and missed the body inside it, the way I measured the name of their world and missed that it meant the ground that holds the dead. What I called human warfare was never about war. It was about love, love extended past death, past sense, past survival, love that will not leave its people in the ground of a lost battle, love that will burn any quantity of force and pay any cost and break any conqueror rather than let a single one of its own be lost or forgotten. I studied their warfare for weeks and realized, too late to file it, too late to stop the fleet, that I had misunderstood the most basic thing, that these people do not make war. They make a refusal to lose each other, and the refusal looks like war from the outside, to a people holding a calculator, and it is not war. It is the fiercest love in the universe, and there is no threshold for love. There has never been a threshold for love, and my entire doctrine was the doctrine of a people who had never learned that, measuring a people who had never known anything else. I am not afraid to stop. They taught me how to look at it and set it down. I have had a good life, the second one, the one I was not born to, the one these people gave me when an old woman asked a monster if it was hungry. I have been a keeper of the dead, which is the best thing a person can be. These people taught me that too. I am about to become one of the dead I kept. I trust the keepers who come after to carry me the way I carried the others. I have left this account so that I will not be lost, and so that they will not be lost, and so that the lesson will not be lost. That the strong do not inherit the universe, the faithful do, the ones who will not leave each other, the gentle ones who learn to be terrible only so the gentleness could survive. I came to measure them. I stayed to love them. I end as one of them. Let the record show that it is possible, that even the enemy, even the author of the worst day, can learn to carry instead of conquer, can be taught by the example of a people who teach everything, can become, at the last, faithful. They made me faithful. It is the only number that ever mattered. It is the only thing I got right. Let the record close on it. Archivist's note: there is nothing to correct in his final entry. He understood us completely at the end, better than we usually understand ourselves, because he came to us from outside and from below as an enemy and a measurer, and had to climb the whole distance to reach what we are born standing on. I thought I was studying human warfare. It was never warfare. That is the whole document in a sentence. They spent weeks studying our wars and realized too late that we have never made war. We have only ever refused to lose each other, and the refusal looks like war to anyone who does not understand love. He understood it. He died understanding it. And we kept him because we keep everyone, because that is the thing he finally learned, the thing that cannot be conquered, the thing I have given my life to carrying forward. He is one of our dead now. I have carried him to you. He is not lost. None of them are lost. That is the entire point. That is what we are. I told the reader at the very beginning that this document was recovered from the wreck of a Hennaki assessment cruiser that fell into a wheat field. I want to return to that wheat field now, because I have carried the reader through the whole of the journal, and it is time to close the frame. And these people, my people, our people, close their accounts the way they open them, changed, so that you can measure the distance. The cruiser was the analyst's, the small survey craft it took down to the surface and never flew again. It sat in the field outside the town for the rest of the analyst's life, and the town let it sit, the way they let everything that becomes part of them sit. And over the years, the wheat grew up around it, and the metal weathered, and it stopped being a wreck and became a thing the town had, a landmark, a place where the children played, not knowing for a long time what it was. And inside it, in a sealed compartment the analyst had prepared with great care in its last years, was this journal, waiting, the way the analyst had arranged for it to wait, for a keeper who was ready. I was that keeper, not by accident. These people do not believe in accident where the dead are concerned. The journal had been kept by the town across the generations, its location remembered, its importance taught, exactly as the analyst had asked, the way these people keep every promise to the dead. And when I came to it 11 years ago, a teacher and an archivist and a man carrying a fresh grief, the town gave it to me, because the town had decided in its slow settling way that I was the one ready to carry it, that my own loss had prepared me to understand an alien's account of how to carry loss. They were right. They are usually right about such things. A people that has spent its whole history learning who is ready to carry what becomes very wise about it. I have spent 11 years with this journal. I have learned the analyst's mind better than I know most of the living. I have stood at its grave in the town's ground, under the line that says he learned to carry U.S., and I have stood at the wreck in the wheat field where it kept this account safe for a keeper it would never meet, and I have stood in the classroom where I teach our children the names of the dead, and I have understood slowly, across the 11 years, that all three places are the same place, that the grave and the wreck and the classroom are one thing, which is the work of refusing to let anyone be lost. Carried out across generations and even across species, by anyone who learns it, by anyone willing to carry. The analyst came to measure us and concluded at the end that the cost of taking us was all of it, everything, an unpayable threshold. I want to add, as the last correction in a document full of my corrections, the one thing the analyst could not say because it was too close to itself to see it. The analyst proved its own conclusion with its own life. It came as the measure of what it would cost to destroy us, and it became, instead, the measure of what it costs to truly know us, and the cost of truly knowing us turned out to be the same as the cost of becoming us. Everything. The analyst gave everything. It gave its people, its function, its certainty, its home, its whole self, and received in return the only thing these people have to give, which is also everything, which is to be carried, to be kept, to be one of the never abandoned. That is the exchange at the heart of what we are. It costs everything and it gives everything, and the books never balance because they were never meant to balance, because love is not arithmetic, because the threshold for love is all of it, and the gift of love is all of it, and the two are the same, and that is the whole secret the analyst spent its life learning, and I have spent mine carrying, and you, reader, now carry too. Because that is what reading this has made you, one more keeper, one more link, one more person who will not let these dead be lost. There is no note on this passage either. I am the note. I have been the note all along. That was the analyst's last lesson to me, that the keeper does not stand outside the account correcting it. The keeper is inside it, carried by it, part of the thing that does not let anyone be lost. I correct the analyst because I love it, the way these people love, with the whole truth in view and nothing forgotten. It got some things wrong at first, and I have said so, because honesty is how we keep faith with the dead. And it got the last thing completely right, and I have said that too. It learned to carry us. I have learned to carry it. The chain holds. It always holds. That is the only thing I have ever had to teach. There is one thing left to do, and then I will close this account and give it to you to carry. The Hennaki Assessment Corps spent weeks studying human warfare. I have the records of it now, the official dossier alongside the private journal, and the dossier is a masterwork of its kind, thorough, precise, every engagement measured, every tactic catalogued. the data very nearly perfect. They studied us as hard and as carefully as anyone has ever studied anything. And at the end of all those weeks of perfect study, they reached a conclusion, and the conclusion summoned a fleet, and the fleet burned Ashford, and the burning began a war that cost a generation and broke the conquerors of 11 worlds, and the entire catastrophe rested on a single error, the error the analyst named in its final entry, the error that is the title of everything I have assembled here. They spent weeks studying human warfare. Then they realized they had misunderstood everything. But I want to be precise, as the analyst taught me, about what the misunderstanding actually was, because it is easy to hear that sentence and think the aliens simply underestimated our strength, that they measured our armies too low and paid for it. That is not the misunderstanding. They measured our strength almost perfectly. Their error was deeper, and it is the error every conqueror makes about us, and it is the error worth understanding above all others. They thought the thing they were studying was warfare. They thought we were a people who makes war, and they set out to measure our war, and they measured it brilliantly, and they never understood, until it was far too late, that we have never once in our whole bloody history actually made war. We have only ever refused to lose each other. Everything they catalogued as tactics and strategy and morale and command was only ever the shape that refusal takes when something tries to take our people from us. They measured the shape and missed the thing casting it. They studied the war and missed the love. And you cannot defeat what you have fundamentally misunderstood, and they had misunderstood the most basic thing about us, the thing we named our whole world after, the thing a schoolteacher said on a square and a city raised on its walls, and a mechanic begged his mother not to die for, and an enemy learned at the last by being fed when it deserved to be killed. We are the people of the ground. We named our world after the dirt that holds our dead because the dead are the thing we will not lose, and the refusal to lose them is the deepest fact about us, deeper than war, deeper than fear, deeper than survival itself. Study our warfare for 1,000 years and you will still misunderstand everything, because the answer was never in the warfare. The answer was always in the ground, in the names on the walls, in the children learning to read from the dead, in the hands teaching hands to plant a tree over a grave. The answer is that we will not let each other be lost. That is all we are. That is all we have ever been. It looks like war from the outside. It has never been war. It is the fiercest love the universe has yet produced, and it cannot be measured, and it cannot be conquered, and it cannot be forgotten, and it taught an enemy who came to destroy it to lay down beside our dead and become one of them. The journal is yours now. You have read it, you carry it. You are a keeper whether you chose it or not, because that is what knowing these things makes you. Carry it well. Teach it if you can. Add the analyst to the dead you will not lose, and Margaret Vey, and Thomas Caro, and Aaron Pace and Ruth Halloway, and the 19 on the bridge, and the 500,000 of Calder, and the 2 million of Ashford, and all the carried, all the kept, all the never abandoned, the whole vast population of the loved dead that we hold against the dark and refuse forever to let go. My name is Ellis Crane. I am a teacher. I have given you what I was given. Do not let them be lost. That is the whole of it. That is the only thing I know. That is what we are.